Good evening, ladies. Wow, all that build up, and I flubbed the first couple lines. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am TJ Whitehead. Power is taken, not given. Joined for the second time, returning guest, Miss Heather, our amateur skeptic. How are you doing today, my friend?
Great. How are you?
Doing fantastic. We are very excited to bring to you our review of a little book called The Case for Christ. Do you remember this book taking the world by storm? Well, at least the Christian fundamentalist world by storm back in the early 2000s.
No, I don't really remember it. It's like my memory of the internet, I think, or cell phones.
Mhm.
Like, I can remember back to a time in my life when I did not know what the internet was. And then I can remember I did know what the internet was, but I don't remember oh, I heard about the internet for the first time on this day, or I remember the first time I knew about, I don't remember that. And that's how this book is for me. I just remember the name being ubiquitous and really famous, but I don't remember ever hearing about it specifically. But I feel like I did so much, but I didn't realize it was that recent. I guess I assumed it was written maybe in the 90s or something.
The book was written in 1998, so it was in the late 90s. Yeah, and so I guess it was the late 90s when it took over, and I remember people talking about it all the time and how powerful it was and how important it was to establish the historicity and the deity of Christ. And by the time I went to college, in the early 2000s, I remember it had reached a fever pitch. People were talking about it all the time. And I couldn't wait to read this book. I wanted to see, what the whole fuss was about. And boy, was I disappointed in what I ran across. I just remember, and keep in mind, I was a Christian at this time. I was still a believer. Mm-hmm. And I just remember thinking that the book seemed like those caricatures that preachers use in those preacher stories where they give this fantastic example of how they ran across an agnostic and told them that, oh, you're an agnostic, and that means the Greek word a, which is nothing, and gnosis, which is knowledge. So you don't know what you're talking about. And burned him, and he converted to Christ that day. That's what this book reminded me of. It was just fantastic story upon absurd story that I couldn't take seriously, and it really bothered me. So if I remember correctly, Heather, you said you don't remember if you read this book or not. Is that correct?
I don't remember that I did or didn't necessarily. I just remember hearing about the book. And as I read so I thought I would listen to the audiobook. Mm-hmm. I kept waiting to hear end of chapter 1 or whatever. And I guess the version I was listening to didn't have any chapter divisions. So I listened past the first chapter with the audiobook. And I can't say I didn't get that feeling of oh yeah, this sounds familiar, or I've read this before. I don't really get that feeling, but that has happened sometimes, even when I know I've read the book before.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. But yeah, I can see what you're saying, because it does kind of have the vibe of one of those stories you hear a Christian tell where they're like, oh, you're an atheist. Have you ever heard of something called Occam's razor?
I know.
Let me break it down for you. I bet you'll believe in God afterwards.
It's like those stories where a young boy stood up to his atheist professor and everybody clapped. One of those things, it's kind of like that. So wanted to go into this. The author is a man by the name of Lee Strobel. What were, from what you saw in the first couple of chapters that you read, what was your vibe that you got from Lee Strobel for the audience?
Honestly, the thing it kept reminding me about. So I listened to the audiobook, like I say, and then I was like, how long is this first fucking chapter? And then I was like, okay, I'm going to look at the paper book. And I was like, oh, I've gone way past the first chapter. Mm-hmm. And I started going through the paper book copy because I thought I would like go through and like write notes in the book itself.
Yeah.
The paper book after reading the paper book. It kept reminding me as I was looking at the paper book part of a rom-com.
Really? How so?
Lines me up. It's like Lee Strobel is the pick-me girl.
Yes, I see it.
And the authenticity of Jesus Christ is like the Prince Charming character. And Lee Strobel's like, I'm not like all the other girls. I'm a skeptic. You'll never convince me, Jesus.
That's a good way.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, here's the part where he says he's not like the other girls. And then I'm like, here's the part where he's like, oh, I'm relatable right here. Humor. That's the Prince Charming character. He has to show that the expert, which that character in this first chapter is this Blomgard guy.
Yeah.
He has to show how Blomgard is funny, loves his family, and is very relatable. So as you feel the pick-me girl, Strobel's like barriers coming down, he's like, yeah, well, what about this? Well, I bet if I let you kiss me, you won't respect me anymore.
That's a good way to put it.
Well, I guess you convinced me that maybe the synoptic gospels are rooted in reality. But this couldn't possibly be true too, could it?
Yeah.
If you can convince me, I might let you put your hand on my shirt. Like, that's what it felt like to me the whole way through. Just like how annoying a rom-com is when you're watching and you're like, stop! Like you're like putting all these fake obstacles. None of these are real concerns. And like, of course, you know you're super hot, and everyone else does too. Just because you're wearing glasses, we can still all see it. And like, that's me. The same feeling as when you're watching a rom-com and you're like, you just want to scream with frustration.
Yes, that's a great way to put it, actually, because the number one word I would use for reading this book is frustrating. This book is it's incredibly difficult to read. Now, I will say that my rereading this book 20 some years later, I do see that Lee Strobel has like this folksy charm about him that would work really well with his audience. I see how it caught on, but yeah, absolutely, yeah. And by the way, we checked on
Baptist.
Yes, we checked on this before we started because you had asked about Lee Strobel's education. I was surprised to find out the guy is a Yale graduate and everything. And it's like, I think this affectation he's putting on an act on purpose because he knows it works with the rubes. And like you said, the frustrating part to me was what got me when I read it as a young man, that the questions he asked were ridiculous. I haven't seen it yet, but I remember there's somewhere in the book where he says something along the lines of, wow, so you're telling me the tomb was empty, huh? Well, he must be God. I mean, really, it's that ridiculous. Yeah, it's absurd. It's like there's nothing hard hitting about it at all. And the pick-me energy is really strong. It starts off strong when he says that he considered...
I had to draw emojis.
Oh, what does it say?
Wow. To demonstrate exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. What? And Strobel does something that these folks love to do, is that they claim to be atheists, that they were atheists at first, saying that, I was an atheist and I was later converted. Listen, I can't read people's minds. I don't know what's in their inner thoughts. I struggle to believe anyone who says they used to be an atheist and became a believer. Because what convinced you? You don't. It's not like you were neutral, where you had no opinion one way or the other. Like, yeah, I don't know, well, maybe not, which is probably where most people land. But to come right out, especially back then, and say I am an atheist, that was a strong declarative statement. And this bilge is what won you over. I don't buy it. Don't buy it for a second. And I wanted to go ahead and start off with Lee Strobel's description of himself right here. So Strobel states, For much of my life, I was a skeptic. In fact, I considered myself an atheist. To me, there was far too much evidence that God was merely a product of wishful thinking, of ancient mythology, of primitive superstition. How could there be a loving God if he consigned people to hell just for not believing in him? How could miracles contravene the basic laws of nature? Didn't evolution satisfactorily explain how life originated? Doesn't scientific reasoning dispel belief in the supernatural? As for Jesus, didn't you know that he never claimed to be God? He was a revolutionary, a sage, an iconoclastic Jew, but God? No, that thought never occurred to him. I could point you to plenty of university professors who said so, and certainly they could be trusted, couldn't they? Let's face it, even a cursory examination of the evidence demonstrates convincingly that Jesus had only been a human being just like you and me, although with unusual gifts of kindness and wisdom. There's a lot of red flags here. There are a lot of red flags in that statement. First is the atheist part. And I actually wrote down the notes here. Something really got me is he starts off saying why he was an atheist, why he did not believe in God. And the first thing he mentions is actually pretty good. He said that wasn't God just a superstition? Okay, we're fine so far. I agree with that. And so, no big deal. Then he goes off the rails with his next three statements where he says, how could a loving God send people to hell? That question, inconsequential, honestly. Whether to the question of whether God exists or not, like God could exist and still send people to hell. God doesn't necessarily have to be a good person. Like your version of a good God might not be real, but that doesn't mean there's no creator. And then second, he says, how could miracles contravene the laws of nature? Miracles could exist and God could not be real. Miracles could exist and God, it's once again, not necessary. The third one really got me. Didn't evolution explain the origin of life? No. Evolution does not explain the origin of life. Nobody claims that evolution explains the origin of life. So the fact that you hung your atheism on these three empty statutes seems kind of odd. Did you catch that?
I thought the hard-hitting questions that atheist was asking from a place of hardcore skepticism
right,
seemed a lot like the questions I heard Christians ask when they were saying they had heard an atheist ask hard-hitting questions. They don't sound like the questions I ask as an atheist. They don't sound like the questions my friends who actually are atheists ask. Like I say, they sound like pick me girl questions, but like the spiritual equivalent. Which, I don't know. Part of me wants to give the benefit of the doubt because, I know now I'll hear Christian fundamentalist perspectives expressed, with which I used to agree.
Right.
I know I did. And, except for views that I've been able to dismiss, pretty recently, and I can really, trace my chain of thought, I guess, my progression of thought. I can't get my mind to go there again. When I try to remember, how did I believe this? And I try to, get my mind to, it's I should be able to understand this perspective, so perfectly, because I used to believe this.
Right.
I can't always get my mind to do that. So, maybe, that could be why. But I don't know, because I can very clearly go back and say, oh, I believed in this as a Christian, and then I encountered this information and I couldn't believe this anymore. And if I couldn't believe this part of Christianity, I couldn't be a Christian. I can really clearly tell you all the reasons that I don't believe in Christianity anymore in the way I used to. And I don't feel like this is that. Exactly what you're saying. I don't feel like this is that. The reasons he's giving, like you say, you could believe all of those things and still believe in God.
Yep.
And none of them really actually speak to the existence of God. They speak more to the character of God or the power of God or the knowledge that God has. But
or specific doctrinal concerns to one particular religion. That's all it is. It's not a critique on the. Hold on. Wolfie's. Give me a second. He's scratching on the door.
Oh no, Princess Wolfie needs to be let in.
Sorry about that. Wolfie was, I closed the door, which I usually don't do. And he's been fine with it this whole time. But now that I started the show, he was like scratching and meowing and everything. So you got to be good boy, Wolfie. Yeah.
Someday. Ears are back.
So one thing I wrote down here is something that really bugged me. This is how, like right away, this is page 1 or 2 of the entire book, where you can tell this is not a scholarly exercise or even historical curiosity. And that is from, let's see, where is this? Yeah, the second paragraph here. As for Jesus, didn't you know that he never claimed to be God? He was a revolutionary, a sage, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I could point you to any number of university professors who said Jesus wasn't God, and certainly they could be trusted, right? That is straight out of the Independent Fundamental Baptist Playbook. Or it's that university professors are lying to you. They know God is real, and they're circumventing. It's like, why would you just cite random university professors as your foundation for why you don't believe in God? It makes no sense at all. Like, once again, I don't know. I saw that as a Christian, and it kind of bothered me that other Christians didn't see that. This is long before I was an unbeliever, but it just showed that the critical thinking just wasn't there at all. And
it goes both ways, because like for him in this book, I feel like that goes both ways, because I think it's called an appeal to authority. Isn't that one of those? Yeah. So I feel like he does a lot of appeal to authority to prove his case, as opposed to like citing actual facts or like historical evidence. He just is like, well, this guy, he went to Harvard, so he would know. Don't you think?
Yeah, we're gonna get there. I can't wait. I can't wait on that stuff. Yeah.
Or he's like, well, experts say this, or this expert said that all the other experts usually say this. So I feel like he kind of does both. He's like, either way, like, these are the experts and we can trust them, and these other experts we can't trust because they probably believe in humanism, etc.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so they're obviously untrustworthy. What bothered me the most,
it doesn't matter what they're saying. Like, if what they're saying is accurate, it's just the people who are saying it, we can trust them.
Yeah. What bothered me the most back then, and even now, just like gripping my hands reading this and everything, is like, what question are we asking here? Because ostensibly you open up by, it's a bait and switch that he does many times here. The question is, I was an atheist. I don't believe that God exists. And then the question becomes like, I'm an atheist and I'm going to ask these random group of people if they think Jesus is God specifically. And it's like, okay, that doesn't make sense if you're an atheist. Like, you're just going to, you're going to not only find out through these series of 10 or 12 interviews, not only that God exists, which is a pretty big revelation right off the bat, but it was this one guy. Like, you're going to believe God exists, and it was this one person. And if you're really on a quest to discover if God is real, why don't you do your case for Odin, your case for Vishnu, your case for Osiris? You have to go through all of this, and
he doesn't. That's a good point. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and he doesn't. Sorry, it's Sorry about that. Very unprofessional. So, like, one more second. All right, we're good now. So I
cat is not lacking in professionalism.
Well, I had closed my door because I was trying to improve the sound quality as like an experiment over. Because I do TikTok videos sometimes in my car, and they sound great. I love the acoustics of being in the car, and I wanted to replicate that as much as I could in my room. And I said, I should close my door. I usually keep it open, but Wolfie fucks that up because he'll either scratch at the door, or if he can't get out, he'll like start scratching at papers, and it's in the background and everything. But no, yeah, I find this happens a lot. And Christian apologetics happens all the time when they do the switch where you say, I don't believe in God. And instead of defending their God, they'll defend the possibility of a God, which even if you grant them that, you still got a lot of work ahead of you to prove that it was this one carpenter 2,000 years ago, right? And he just jumps straight to the second argument. He doesn't even bother trying to prove the first one.
I feel like he does that over and over and over. Like, that's all the book is him saying, here's this question that's impossible to answer objectively, and here I'm going to answer a different question.
Yes.
But I'm going to pretend that I'm answering this question that can't actually be answered. Anyway.
Oh God. So the first chapter, what is the first chapter called here? The first chapter is called, I think,
The opening, the
the
investigation of
the
a life. No, that's the introduction.
the
Sorry.
eyewitness evidence is the first chapter that we have going on here. Yes. So the one thing that I was kind of surprised to learn as I got older, I don't know when I'm pretty sure I was in college when I learned this, that we don't actually have any eyewitness contemporary evidence of Jesus. None whatsoever. Like, do you remember when you learned that, Heather?
Well, I don't know if I ever learned that, but because like I keep trying to remember what I learned in school as I'm reading this.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm like, oh, I feel like I learned about this. Like when he talks about the Q document and stuff, Q source, I'm like, oh, I feel like I learned about that, but I don't remember what I learned about it. And same with many of the claims he makes. I remember though, even at Maranatha, when I was working on my bachelor's degree, and to graduate from Maranatha, you at least what I was told by the faculty at the time, you must complete the equivalent of a minor in biblical studies, enough credit to equal a minor, but you don't get a minor in it. It's just like to graduate from Maranatha, you have to complete that. And so you don't have to declare a minor if you go to that college, was what I was told. So that seems like a lot. And I took extra. I remember because biblical studies was a thing I was very interested in. So I took extra courses that from what I was required to. But I don't really remember as much as I wish I did about any of that. But like, I do remember even at Maranatha, which is a very conservative, fundamentalist institution, Christian fundamentalism, Baptist fundamentalism. I remember the professors saying there is controversy about this, which I had not heard that.
Yeah.
and being like, well, you know, some people say that like this guy wrote this book of the Bible and not actually Paul, or some people say this guy wrote it. So I was exposed to the idea that there was like disagreement about it. And I was surprised at how Blomgard, the first guy he interviews in the first chapter, seemed, even though he said he was not a fundamentalist, and that he was more progressive, like, so just a regular evangelical, I'm assuming, that he seemed to like, so like summarily just to like gloss over very controversial topics as far as like the authorship and authenticity of the books of the Gospels is concerned. You'd be like, oh yeah, this is something some people think, but like most people like just like move right along. And I'm like, oh, wait, like I think there are whole books written about it.
Let's hop right into that actually with so the guy that Heather is talking about is the first interview of the book, and his name is Craig Blomberg. And so I'm going to go ahead and share the credentials of Mr. Blomberg here. And so this is how he's introduced. Craig Blomberg is widely considered to be one of the country's foremost authorities on the biographies of Jesus, which are all called the Four Gospels. He received his doctorate in New Testament from Aberdeen University in Scotland, later serving as a senior research fellow at Tyndale House at Cambridge University in England, where he was part of an elite group of international scholars that produced a series of acclaimed works on Jesus. For the last dozen years, he has been a professor of the New Testament at the highly respected Denver Seminary. Now, that's a pretty solid resume this guy has there. And I noticed that he is a 12-year professor at the highly respected Denver Seminary that I have never heard of. And I gotta say, I've been in these circles a while. So I decided to check how respected this place is. And according to EDU rank, Denver Seminary is ranked the 1,563rd best seminary in the United States and the 21st best seminary in Colorado out of 38. So now granted, to be fair, to be absolutely as charitable as I possibly can here, these are the 2025 ranks. I could not find the 1998 ranks. EDU rank didn't exist back then, and every chart I saw from the top seminaries, they weren't by state, they were by in the country. They named like the top 30 or the top 50. It didn't crack it either time. So not a good start when I saw that. I was like, okay, let's see. Nope, his credentials not as impressive as this guy would lead you to think. But
Did
Heather,
you look him up on YouTube? Did you look him up on YouTube?
So I didn't watch any of his videos. When I was doing searches for him, I ran across a couple of his videos, but I never watched any. Did you?
I watched a little bit of one, and I mean, it's about tithing and the contemporary Christian. I'm like, okay, yeah, you're a real progressive.
Well, the thing is that to me, it's like that doesn't surprise me because this guy is a theologian first and a historian second. This guy has a doctrinal axe to grind. He's like, here is my theology. This is what I believe about Christianity. That takes preeminence over any historical data, and he's going to see it through that lens. Which is why it was really funny when Lee Strobel said that he wanted to go talk to hard-hitting critics of this. Yeah, come on. Yeah. What are you talking about here?
But I think he did a really good job with both himself and with Blomberg.
I
just want him to be Blomgard. Which I do feel like this is a thing that happens in fundamentalism, like the appeal to authority thing. Like those credentials he listed are fucking impressive. Like that is indisputable. Like hearing, and same for himself. Like the credentials of both these men, who are the only two characters really in this chapter, are like top notch, like better than mine for sure when it comes to like understanding or examining scripture or historical claims or even like investigating something in a journalistic way. Like I don't know about any of that. And so like their credentials are really good, and I do think their credentials show in the writing. Like I was impressed actually, because you said reading this book made you feel like you were drinking a cup of air.
Yeah.
When you believe about it.
Yes.
And I was like, I don't know. I think this is a pretty like interesting book as far as if you were a fundamentalist Christian and you picked this book up, I think you would find the book to be compelling. Strobel, I think, has an extensive and colorful vocabulary. He sounds educated. He sounds impressive, but his writing is relatable because I think he is a very good storyteller and his stories are interesting. He does sound like an investigative journalist.
Yeah.
And like I feel like he follows this pattern over and over again of like pulling in your attention and interest with a really compelling story and then leaving the story before you reach the conclusion of the story, which, of course, leaves you feeling curious to know the conclusion of the story. And then when he departs from the story, he has like a paragraph or two describing the exact principle he's trying to prove with the story he started with up here. And then after he says, here's this really interesting story. Here's the point I was proving, if you couldn't tell already from the story. And then he returns to the story and is like, here's the punch, here's the whole point. And the conclusion of the story shows that I am correct. And so like, it's interesting. Like, it's an interesting read in that way. It's just like, there's no substance.
Well, that's what I was going to say, that you're referring to the style. I was referring to the substance. Yeah. With the cup of air, there's no meat to this at all.
It's like a crystal goblet.
Yeah. So, that's what I meant. That when I read it, I won't take anything away from Lee Strobel and his ability to spin a good yarn. We didn't even talk about the intro. Like the intro, he told a really great story about an investigation he had where
about Dixon.
It was a great story. It was a story. Yeah. So this cop had responded to this call, and he was shocked by this miscreant who was threatening his girlfriend. and the cops opened up the case. This guy had already done 3 years for shooting someone else before. The cop shows up, a couple years later, and he shoots the cop. Of course, this guy did it. They lock him up. And then as the investigation unwinds, it turns out the cop shot himself on accident and pinned it on this guy who pled guilty. Say what?
With an illegal weapon.
With an illegal weapon, a pen gun. And I remember he said, I said, what is a pen gun? And then Lee Strobel said, you're probably wondering what a pen gun is. Like, yes, I've never heard of that. What the hell is a pen gun?
But knows all the questions you're going to ask.
Yeah. And a pen gun is an illegal firearm that's shaped like a pen, which I didn't know. This is like some CIA shit or whatever, but it's illegal to have, even if you're an officer of the law. And this guy pled guilty to shooting the cop. So really, like, why would you think he didn't do it? And Strobel asked him, all right, if you didn't shoot this guy, why did you plead guilty? He says, well, I had served 3 years in prison for a shooting for which I was exonerated. And he's like, and then I got arrested for this crime, spent a year in jail waiting for the trial, and is shooting a cop. And he says, like, the lawyer says, look, you can take a chance that you'll beat the case, but if you do that, you'll get a longer sentence. So just plead guilty. So I said, yeah, I pled guilty. This guy was convicted of shooting someone twice. And he was innocent both times. Not a strong case of support for our legal system. I got to tell you that this poor guy did it, but yeah, that was pretty rough. But he did a good job telling the story, so I can't take that away from him.
I want to also say, like, as you're telling that story, you reminded me, I feel like his stories also carefully. Okay, so like with my work, I teach voice and piano lessons, and I do these like posts on my business page where I'm like, great job to this student, right? Mm-hmm. And so I have colleagues, and I've seen them make posts like that too, and they'll use their personal page. Yeah. And they'll say, I'm so proud of my student who just won this voice scholarship or got this part in a play or something like that. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But what I think is better is if you share it on your studio page in the third person. So like when I share a post, I'm always like, congratulations to Miss Heather's voice student, Inara, who just won a voice scholarship this week. And then I share the post on my personal page. I'm like, I'm so proud of my students. So it's like I'm sharing a post from a different organization.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so I feel like that makes the information seem more important than it would if I'm just like, hey, my student did this thing. See? But it's like if it's in the third person and it's shared from a different. And so I feel like he does little tricks like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
To make himself seem better because he's sharing stories from his own life. And he uses those stories to show what a great investigator he is.
Yes.
Because he's the one who discovered that this is what happened. Like, at least that's the way he points it, makes it out to be. That's the picture he paints. Is like his investigation is what cracked this case.
So, all right. I'm glad you.
This was all over national news when I did this. He does it over and over again. So he like compliments himself, pats himself on the back, but he doesn't say, I did this. He's like, this story happened.
I had a similar thought when I read it because I had it the first time and I thought, wait a minute, is he the reason this guy is free and not sitting in a jail cell somewhere? And I went back and read it. And it's not what he says, but he does make it seem that way. Because when I reread it, what happened is he talked to someone at the office. He's an investigative journalist at the Chicago Tribune. And he talked to someone at the office who had talked to an informant. And the informant said, no, that guy's actually innocent. The cop shot himself. And then somehow the informant
he had carefully developed.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so
not just an informant.
And the informant had already gone to the government, and a grand jury investigation was already set up. So this would have happened without
his informant.
His informant. Yeah. So like the way he framed it, it seemed like he was the reason. I was like, no, actually, it was this guy the entire time.
I worked at the Chicago Tribune. Like, that's really impressive. You know,
it is, right?
He could have said, I'm an investigative journalist, or he could have said, like, I have a bachelor's degree in this, and I have a doctorate in this. But no, he like names the impressive institutions.
Yeah.
So
And that would have carried a lot of weight with the
oh yeah,
the bumpkins, of course it did. It didn't work so well on old TJ. I gotta say, I was not impressed, but I was a fundamentalist and realized like, what is going on here? And a pretty young one too. But all right, so
if I'd read this, I know I would have been like, oh, this is a great book. I'm sure I would have.
I don't know.
I think so. I would have ate something like this up. It's like,
so
I was taught that to respect authority. And when this authority is confirming all the things you want to be true.
Yeah. It's easy to swallow it.
Yeah.
So I brought this up in case you were curious. I was shitting on Denver Seminary. These are Maranatha's rankings, just so you know. It's the 36th best college in Wisconsin out of 47, which not a great number. Not a great number, but I just wanted to bring that up there. So we're not as good. We're not even on the level of Blomberg there. So all right, we're not even on Blomberg's level. So all right, so what the whole thing is about is the authenticity of the Gospels. That's what we really start off with, which is honestly a good place to start. A good place to start if you're going to study the historicity of Jesus. How one would go about studying the divinity of Jesus, I have no idea. I have no idea. It's strange to me that a doctor of divinity is a degree you can actually get, as if anyone knows more about divinity than anyone else. It's a straight like doctor of theology. Got it. I understand that. Doctor of Divinity, go fuck yourself. It might as well be a doctor of wizardry. It's insane. And so, all right, I wanted to talk about this where he goes right into the authorship of the Gospels. And this is what he writes right here. This is Strobel talking to Blomberg.
I love this. I underlined with an edge of challenge.
Oh, I can't wait. I know. Blomberg says, or Strobel says, "Tell me this," I said with an edge of challenge in my voice. "Is it really possible to be an intelligent, critically thinking person and still believe that the four Gospels were written by the people whose names have been attached to them?" Blomberg set his cup of coffee on the edge of his desk and looked intently at me. "The answer is yes," he said with conviction. The gravity and weight he puts behind that. There were only 2, possibly 3 answers he could have given, but he made it seem like it was this earth-shattering thing. The answer is yes, you can believe it. I'm glad you caught that too.
I just want to point out. Did you notice?
I noticed the set of the
water
yes.
I wanted to point that out first.
I love that.
To draw attention to this important moment. Mm-hmm. Want me to do it one more time? This is where I first wrote. So skeptical. Reminds me of a
Yep.
I'm not like the other skeptics. You're going to have to try a little harder. Did you hear the edge in my voice? I'm a bad girl skeptic.
Yeah, so they start going into this, and the first thing that Blomberg tells him is true. He says that, well, technically all the Gospels are anonymous. I was glad that he pointed that out first, but then I thought, well, what else is there to talk about then? If you uniform testimony of the early church is like uniform, like that's such a strong word to use, I feel like, about anything in scripture. And like the answer is yes. That also, it's just so like certain. And it's like, how uniform was the belief of the authors? And he says, I know no competitors. Yes, yeah, I would get that. It was not in dispute. All right, yeah, so, all right, I'll get to exactly what Heather's talking about here is that Blomberg states that the Gospels are anonymous. No one's name is signed to any of these 4 documents. However, early church tradition states that these were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And everyone kind of agrees with that the early church said it. And my favorite thing is that he attacks the synoptic gospels first, where he says that, well, with Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's just no competitors for it. Like, that's the names that are on there. So and people seem to believe that. So it must be true. And Strobel was like, yeah, that's it.
I was like, oh, okay, sounds good.
Yeah, that's it.
All I need is the word of this expert to tell me. I'm not going to like read any dissenting books other than Karen Armstrong. She's the only dissenting.
I can't wait to get to Karen Armstrong. Cannot wait to get to Karen Armstrong. Can't wait. Well,
if Karen Armstrong said it, that's the only thing that matters as an argument.
I mean, it would be better. Karen Armstrong is infinitely more respected and known in this field than Blomberg. Are you fucking kidding me?
There's no one else he could possibly cite. He just keeps citing her and Blomberg.
Well, Armstrong doesn't agree with Blomberg. That's the funny part. Like the person who has the actual credentials, which he does not list.
Yes. All he says is she used to be a nun. That's her entire list of credentials. She used to be a nun, and now she's not.
Yeah, that's hilarious. And
these opinions.
Yeah, which all right. Remind me. Well, actually, I have the notes because I got
the mean girl in the rom-com.
I don't remember everyone he interviewed. I don't think we'll be seeing him go talk to Karen Armstrong. I don't think that's going to happen. I'd be very surprised if we find out that he interviews someone who actually knows what she's talking about. So, he goes over to the Synoptic Gospels first. And see, did I write notes about the Synoptic Gospels in here? For people wondering what we mean. Oh, no, I'll get to that later. Okay. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And he says there's no competitors for this. And my question would be, no, he says, well, one reason that he believes these are actually written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he says, well, think about it. If someone was just slapping names on this and it wasn't legitimate, why would they pick someone like Matthew, who was a tax collector, or Mark or Luke, who weren't even part of the 12? I mean, that seems kind of odd, right? And it's like, okay, maybe, but if it's so important that these came from the disciples, why didn't they sign their names to the book? That seems like the obvious choice, right? Like if you were the Apostle Matthew, that lends a lot of weight to it. You know, it makes a lot more sense that someone came up with this than Matthew just forgot to sign this very important work, right?
Yeah. And like, I don't know. I felt bad as I was researching this because I was like, I feel bad to say for people to listen to me saying my opinions because I'm not a Bible scholar. Like the
apparently it doesn't take much to be one, so don't worry about it.
Equivalent of a minor from a very bad Bible college apparently is like and the Christian education I received in my elementary and high school years, like those are all my credentials I have to back up what I think about this. And I feel like someone like Dan McClellan, if he did like a thing about this, he'd be like, oh yeah, well, here's all these important facts that prove this wrong. And I don't really know all of those facts. So I'm just going off of like opinions, kind of like you're saying, it seems like they would have signed their name. I don't know if that's true though. I don't know if that was the cultural practice at the time.
Paul did multiple times. So
oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, Paul did a bunch of them before the Gospels were written, by the way. So yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the guy did say, well, it seems like a proof that they were written by the people who we think wrote them is because like later Gospels had more famous names signed to them, Mary or whatever. I mean, I guess that argument does make sense to me, but it doesn't seem like a very powerful
It's
argument.
not evidence at all. It's not like at all. It's just no evidence whatsoever. Yeah.
Circumstantial evidence? Like something like that, maybe?
It's not even circumstantial because it's not positive evidence. It's like, it reminds me of whenever I was going to save this for Alexander the Great, but a lot of times when you talk about the fact that there's no contemporary eyewitness accounts of Jesus, we don't have any writings about Jesus from anyone who was alive when Jesus was alive and saw him. We have nothing like that. The closest we have is Paul, who was alive when Jesus was alive but never saw him. And you bring this up to people.
Don't some people believe though that there were like because I thought that was a thing they tried really hard to prove in like a New Testament survey. at Maranatha, I feel like they tried to show like actually like
What they reference is they reference what's his name? He's the Josephus. Josephus is the person that they'll reference a lot. Josephus never saw Jesus. Josephus was born like around the time Jesus died, like around AD 20, AD 30. He never met the man. And that's and Tacitus is another one that they'll reference, who was born well after Jesus died, like maybe 20 years after he died or something like that. But
they say like Mark and Matthew and John, like, don't they claim?
Well, but there's right.
Like,
They'll, if you
people
believe
they did write it and that they were.
Yeah, if you believe
really
that
they didn't.
Right. If you believe the Gospels were written by Matthew and John, then you would have had two eyewitnesses, but there's no evidence by Matthew and John, and so that's what there's no like verified. And when you bring this up, because like Jesus' resurrection, his crucifixion, it's not written about at all at the time, and when it happened. And people will cite that, well, listen, Jesus was an illiterate carpenter, itinerant preacher. Of course, you're not going to find any records about this guy. Why would you expect it? It's like, that's true. That's true. But you know what? It's also not evidence. I'm sorry. That's not my problem. And so that's what this reminds me of when they do that. Like, well, that's how it is. Okay, it's true, but it's not evidence. And so with the argument that we have,
still just answering the question, was Jesus the Son of God, and is the Bible true? I think like one of those questions is not really proving God exists.
Yes. Yeah, we're gonna get to that toward the end here. And so with those were his arguments and so I'll bring up what he said. You guys might be thinking this too, because Matthew, Mark, and Luke, not high heavy hitters in this game or whatever. And Strobel said, well, that sounds logical, but it was obvious that he was conveniently leaving out one of the gospel writers. What about John? I asked. He was extremely prominent. In fact, he wasn't just one of the 12 disciples, but one of Jesus's inner three, along with James and Peter. Yes, he's the one exception, Blomberg conceded with a nod. Guy paints a good picture. And interesting.
Also, while you're stopped, I just want to say, like, this is another thing that I was saying before, like how he says, Blomberg conveniently left out this fact.
Right, yeah.
Like, I'm not so easily fooled like the other girls.
Right, yeah, it does seem like the way.
Blomberg. You'll never take me out for a fancy dinner if this is where you're going to play ball. Like, that's what it feels like to me, with those little words that he throws in like that.
It's true. And interestingly, John is the only gospel about which there is some question about authorship and exactly what is in dispute. The name of the author isn't in doubt. It's certainly John, Blomberg replied. The question is whether it was John the Apostle or a different John. You see, the testimony of a Christian writer named Papias, dated about AD 125, refers to John the Apostle and John the Elder. And it's not clear from the context whether he's talking about one person from two perspectives or two different people. But granted that exception, the rest of the early testimony is unanimous that it was John the Apostle, the son of Zebedee, who wrote the gospel. When I read this, I actually had to pause myself where he said that there is no question that the author's name was John. And I was like, really? I was like, because like, the book of Revelation is written by someone named John. It starts off, John, I am John, this is my writing. I was like, wait, does the Gospel of John say that? Because I'm pretty sure, I checked, of course it was anonymous. He just declaratively states the author is definitely named John, no evidence whatsoever. Like that is a lie. It kind of bothered me.
I feel like he does that over and over. Like he just says, like even here at the beginning of the first interview, Blomberg is one of the country's foremost authorities on the biographies of Jesus, which are called the four Gospels. One, maybe this is just me being ignorant, which is totally an option here, but I had never heard the Gospels referred to as biographies of Jesus, actually.
Yeah, you're right.
Way of putting it. And I see why it's important for him to throw that conjecture out there. But I've never heard them called biographies of Jesus. I thought of them more as like a history or something. But I guess they are kind of.
It's the closest thing to a biography because most biographies don't cover 2.5 years of someone's life. Like that's an odd word for it, you know?
Which is why he had to then explain why they still count the biography.
Yeah.
Well, they only do that, and how in ancient times the stuff we think that is important for a biography was not important for them.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It counts as a biography. But like he just says, Craig Blomgard is widely considered to be one of the country's foremost authorities on the biographies of Jesus, which are called the Four Gospels, period. There's nothing to back that up. You would think the next sentences are, because that's where he cites the man's credentials. The only thing these credentials prove are he graduated with a doctorate from Aberdeen University, and he was a research fellow at Tyndale House at Cambridge.
Yeah.
Where he wrote a series of acclaimed works about Jesus, and then he started working at the Denver Seminary. For some reason, I guess Cambridge didn't want to hire him.
Yeah. He was too good for Cambridge. He wanted to go to the real heavy hitters in Denver.
He had to go to a celebrated school.
Right, yeah.
Theological seminary. And so, like, that's it, as far as I can tell. Like, he's written some books about it, but, like, I don't know. I've never heard of him before. And his
It's been 20 years. It's been 20 years, and I know who this guy is, right? Yeah.
Like the foremost authority in the nation on the historicity of Jesus, I guess. Like,
right.
To prove this. So, like, he just makes claims like that over and over again in this chapter.
This
is cool. Let's move on.
Yes, yes.
Close.
So after going way out on the limb there with Blomberg saying that the writer of the book is the author of the book is definitely someone named John, he references a man named Papias from AD 125. Now, Papias was a Greek bishop from the late 1st and early 2nd century. He was born in AD 60, died in AD 130. And he wrote a document called Expositions on the Sayings of the Lord, a work that has been lost to time, but we still have surviving fragments and quotes from it. People quoted from the book after it was written. You can't quote a book before it was written, but they quoted the book, and so that's how we know it existed and what was written in there, but we don't have any full remaining copies of it. And in the work, Papias states that he gathered his information as follows. This is a quote from his book. Oh, wait. Next slide. This is Papias here. I shall not hesitate also to put into ordered form for you, along with interpretations, everything I learned carefully in the past from elders and noted down carefully for the truth of which I vouch. For unlike most people, he was a pick-me as well, I took no pleasure in those who told many different stories, but only in those who taught the truth. Nor did I take pleasure in those who reported their memory of someone else's commandments, but only in those who reported their memory of the commandments given by the Lord to the faith and proceeding from truth itself. And if by chance anyone who had been
higher standard than Blomgard and
Strobel
do.
And
Strobel
if by
a way to explain why it's okay to not use firsthand, but to use the evidence other people saw,
yeah,
and then on to someone else. So it's funny.
And if by chance anyone who had been in attendance on the elders arrived, I made inquiries about the words of the elders, what Andrew or Peter had said, or Philip, Thomas, James, John, Matthew, or any of the Lord's disciples, and whatever Aristian and John the elder, the Lord's disciples, were saying. For I did not think that information from books would profit me as much as information from a living and surviving source. Now, what he mentions there is the thing about John, and John, it mentions 2 Johns. It mentions in the list of the apostles, he's like, I took these notes from people who talked to the apostles, Peter, Andrew, James, John, so on and so forth. I also talked to 2 guys, Aristian and John the elder. And so that is Blomberg's evidence that John wrote the Gospel of John. That what we just read right there, that is his evidence that it was someone named John, because Papias seemed to, I'll get to this also, Papias seemed to insinuate that Matthew and Mark were written by Matthew and Mark, and he said that he knew people who knew John. So clearly John wrote. That's it. That is as flimsy as the evidence gets for him. But it's even better because if you were to look up information about Papias, oh, sorry, where goes the other?
Well, I want you to know, put your mind at ease, because
Okay.
23, it says it was just not in dispute.
It was not in dispute.
Right.
Nobody.
It
Well,
was
you know,
not in dispute. It's the authorship of the Gospels.
it's
So
just funny.
we didn't have to talk that much. We knew.
It's funny you say that because as we dive into this, not only was it not in dispute at this time, it may not even have been talked about at all at this time. And we'll get to that here on who wrote these four gospels. Like it wasn't really the first person. Well, I'll get to it a little bit. But anyway, Papias, he wrote a little bit about Matthew and Mark, which is like if you actually Google Papias and look up his writings, people will refer to him as saying the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, but not John. Like this guy came up with the John thing all by himself. Like you won't find that anywhere other than what's his name, than Blomberg. But this is what he has to say about Matthew and Mark. So in his in the book that Papias wrote, he wrote about Mark. Mark, indeed, who became the interpreter of Peter, wrote accurately, as far as he remembered them, the things said or done by the Lord, but not, however, in order. For he had neither heard the Lord nor been his personal follower, but at a later stage, as I said, he had followed Peter, who used to adapt the teachings to the needs of the moment, but not as though he were drawing up a connected account of the oracles of the Lord, so that Mark committed no error in writing certain matters just as he remembered them. For he had only one object in view, namely to leave out nothing of the things which he had heard and include no false statement among them. And about Matthew, he wrote, and so Matthew composed the sayings in the Hebrew tongue, and each one interpreted them to the best of his abilities. Now, that is what a lot of people will reference, saying, well, by AD 125, which would have been about 50 years after Mark was written, 10 to 20 years after John were written, that he's like, okay, clearly he's saying that the books of Matthew and Mark were written by Matthew and Mark from his secondhand account, which is pretty close. You know, it's not bad. It could be worse. But the thing about this is when he talks about Mark, he never mentions that this is the Gospel of Mark. We don't really know. He said that Mark knew Peter, and Peter told Mark some things, and Mark wrote some things down. We don't know if he's talking about our Gospel of Mark. We have no idea. He almost certainly is not talking about the Gospel of Matthew that we know. That one, I'm a layman too on this, but I'm fairly confident about this because he wrote right there that Matthew wrote the works of Jesus down in two ways. He wrote, I'll pull it back up here. He says that, so Matthew composed the sayings in the Hebrew tongue. And so the sayings were like the Q source, which would just been like quotes from Jesus. That's where a lot of these books were. They were just quotes that people attributed to Jesus. And he said he wrote it in Hebrew. All of the Gospels, every damn one of them was written in Koine Greek. This is not up for debate. That it is clearly not a translation. You won't find anyone anywhere who says, like even the most conservative Christians, scholars on this, who will say that Matthew was written in Hebrew. Can't happen. So this is referencing Matthew maybe wrote some stuff down about Jesus in Hebrew, but it's almost impossible that he's talking about the Matthew that we know and love.
That's disappointing.
It's disappointing. But anyway, it's just funny that he doesn't talk about this. He doesn't really go.
Because it's getting kind of dark here.
Oh.
Sorry.
All right.
Ooh. The sun is setting.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Is that better?
Yeah, it's good. So then he jumps forward. Now, when I mentioned that the gospel writers, how it wasn't in dispute and how it wasn't even a discussion back then, that the first person to actually assign names to these four gospels that we know, he mentions in the book, it's a man named Irenaeus. Irenaeus, I can't remember how to say it, but Irenaeus is the first person. This was around AD 180 is when Irenaeus said, these books, I believe, were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So, 60 years before that, it probably wasn't a dispute because it wasn't really a discussion. But I put the quote that he has from Irenaeus in here, where he says, Irenaeus, writing around AD 180, confirmed the traditional authorship. In fact, here, he said, reaching for a book, he flipped it open and read Irenaeus' words. Matthew published his own gospel among the Hebrews in their own tongue. Once again, book of Matthew not written in Hebrew. When Peter and Paul were preaching in the gospel in Rome and founding the church there. After their departure, Mark, the disciple interpreter of Peter himself, handed down to us in writing the substance of Peter's preaching. Luke, the follower of Paul, set down in a book the gospel preached by his teacher. Then John, the disciple of the Lord, who also leaned on his breast, himself produced the gospel as he was living in Ephesus in Asia. This is the first time anybody says that those four books were Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And note the date there, AD 180. This is a full 110 years after the book of Mark was written. It is a long, long gap between the creation of the authorship of these books and the names being assigned to them. And I see why it's very important in Christian circles to say, hey, we have a direct link to the life of Jesus. These guys can be trusted here. But it was several decades before they were written and a century before they were even assigned.
I just would say, though, to be fair, like, all of that is not proof that the Gospels are not written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Like, that's not proof necessarily, because I don't know, like, it is disappointing to hear that Matthew would have been writing in Hebrew, and that, the gospel was written in Koine Greek. But at the same time, I mean, every Bible we read now has been translated like many times. So that doesn't mean that, like, if you believe the Bible is the inspired word of God, like, the information having been transmitted through a couple different languages, like, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true. Just like they're not proving it is true. I don't think the things you're saying prove that it isn't true necessarily. Don't you think?
Well, it depends on what question you're trying to answer. Like, are you trying to answer the question, are these books written by these four men? Or is the question trying to answer, can I prove they weren't written by these four men? And you can't ever do that. Like, there's no way that you could possibly prove, like, no evidence outside of a video camera recording someone writing it. Yeah, there's no way to prove it wasn't written by somebody. So I just think it's the wrong question. It kind of deflects from the intent of the scholarship, right?
Because, like, the question he's trying to answer is, did Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John actually write the books? And they either had firsthand evidence or they were they were just like writing down what someone who did have firsthand evidence was saying. That's the question he's trying to answer.
Right.
And he's trying to prove that the only answer is yes. Like, they wrote it. That's what I'm
obviously wrote it. Yeah.
Like, and that's what everybody thinks. So I guess if you just can throw doubt on that being true, you've like won the argument.
I think it just gets a lot worse though as the chapter goes on. The evidence and so all right. So about the authorship, Heather had mentioned Q earlier in the conversation, and unless you went to a distinguished university like Heather and I.
I just want to vindicate both of us by saying we both have a master's degree. Not Maranatha.
Right, yeah. Well, so, I mean, it's
the bachelor's degree was fine.
Yeah. I think Maranatha did a decent job educating me. I have very few complaints for outside of the religious nonsense. But so the Q source, what Heather was mentioning there, and so there's four gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels. And they're called the Synoptic Gospels because they're very similar, eerily similar. Mark is known to be
where they contradict each other, which they never do. But when they do,
it's funny. It is funny. The contradictions are funny because the fundamentalists kind of write themselves into a corner with this because they'll say that every word of the Bible is inspired by God, verbal, plenary inspiration and all that, and there's no errors anywhere. And so you'll point out an error. Like in one of the Gospels, it says Jesus was walking towards Jericho and he ran across a blind man and he healed him and then went into the city. And another Gospel says, as Jesus was leaving Jericho, he ran across a blind man and healed him and left. They said, okay, this is obviously the same story. It takes place in the same like chronological order. Why is he running into the blind man before Jericho in one and after Jericho in another? And they'll say, that is useless. Like that is like, and you're right. It is trivial. It is like it is not important to the story whether Jesus was entering the city or leaving the city. But you're the fucking ones who said it was perfect in every way. If you didn't say that, no one would really give a shit. Like, oh well, some guy remembered it as one way and as another, but the point of the story is the same. So they kind of trap.
Horrible, plenary inspired word of God.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like it doesn't have to be. You don't have to make that claim. You don't. It's univocal from beginning to end.
Yep.
You don't have to make the claim. There are no contradictions. Like you don't have to make that claim. But if you are, like that's a really, really fucking high bar.
It is. So, and they can accuse you of being petty all you want. It's like, listen, when you say something is perfect,
that there was textual criticism.
Yep.
Criticism. Like you can't get away from it.
You can't.
And
so. Okay.
I mean, the Beatitudes, like this, are in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. In Luke, they're from the Sermon on the Lord's Prayer is in that sermon, but in Luke, it's in the Sermon on the Plain. I mean, like,
yeah.
I guess like maybe he could have said the same thing twice in two different sections. Like you could get around some of those things that way, but
it just sounds ridiculous because you'll see this like. Most people will say that actually. Well, he actually ran into two blind guys, the one on his way to the city and one as he left the city. And this writer only records like, bro, stop it. Okay, this is insanity. But they will do that shit. It's pretty annoying, but you're kind of forced to say something stupid like that. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John cover a lot of the same topics. They cover them in the same order. They cover the same events. They even use the same words a lot of times. And clearly, they were copying from each other. It's not a coincidence. And so since Mark was the oldest one, people realized that Matthew and Luke lifted a lot of their material from Mark. But Matthew and Luke also have a bunch of material that's not in Mark, but it's also pretty much verbatim. And so that's where they figured it came from another source, the Q source. And that has been lost.
They think,
yeah. And I mean, it makes sense. Like, it's like if you have one example of it, or here's their copy shit and we have the source and they copy something else, there's probably another source unless they like wrote it in the same room or something like that. Like, it was, and that's what we're talking about with the Q source. Now, then, this is actually the first good question that Lee Strobel asked. And it's one I hadn't even thought of, which really surprised me. But I'll pull it up right here. This is all right, give me a second. I'll set this question up real quick. So, as we were saying, the Synoptic Gospels clearly had Matthew and Luke copying from Mark and almost certainly copying from a second source. Now, look at this question that old Lee Strobel asked right here. He says, Blomberg's mention of Matthew brought to mind another question concerning how the Gospels were put together. Why, I asked, would Matthew, purported to be an eyewitness of Jesus, incorporate part of the Gospel written by Mark, who everyone agrees was not an eyewitness of Jesus? If Matthew's gospel really was written by an eyewitness, you would think he would have relied on his own observations. That is a damn good question. I love that question so much. Like, if you're Matthew and you spent 3 years with the Son of the living God, like working with this guy, seeing his miracles and shit, why would you rely on someone's secondhand information about what Jesus did? You would just write what you did. And you would know what Mark wrote already. You could write stuff he didn't write. But why would you? I was like, God, that's actually, I'm so upset. I never thought of that question myself. Did you catch that part, Heather?
What page are you on?
Let's see. Oh, I didn't put,
I'm trying to find where you're talking about.
So let's see.
Got it.
You know, I was going to put page numbers on this and for citations, but I was having problems with my audio for like 45 minutes before we started the call, and so I didn't get to. But
Is it maybe like page 28? But for example,
let's see.
Tell him to consider my miracles, blah, blah, blah. Why would Matthew, reported eyewitness of Jesus, incorporate part of, okay. Yeah. I wrote on there, I don't know if this will directly apply, but I'll just say these things that I wrote while we're on this page. That at the top of the page, says if you isolate all the Q sayings, one actually gets the same kind of picture of Jesus, a picture of someone who makes audacious claims about himself, as you find in the Gospels more generally. So to me, that seems like a pretty big claim to me. And that's a direct quote from Blomberg. So I guess the fact that Blomberg said it and it's in quotes is a primary source for the fact that the Q, which we don't know for sure if the Q exists actually, but no one alive today has ever read or seen Q, but we know that Jesus makes lots of audacious claims about himself, just like he does in the Gospels in the Q. And that seems like a big claim to make without having anything to back it up, or like citing any like sources or references or like things that people at least think came from the Q that say this. And then I also wrote down in the next paragraph, he talks about Blomberg reaching over his desk to pick up a leather-bound Bible and rustle through its well-worn pages.
He's a spiritual man.
Really, with a heart.
Spiritual man.
Coming through. He may be smart, but he has a heart.
He's a good man. He studies the word.
Win this pick me girl over by the end.
You gotta love it.
Guaranteed.
You gotta love it.
And I just put, so he put in the next paragraph, so even in Q, there's clearly an awareness of Jesus's ministry of miracles, because he's trying to say, like, what did the Q say about Jesus's supernatural ministry, I guess. And I was just like, did he trace all the connections from Q to Luke? Is all of Luke from Q? Is the Q accurate? Is there a way of proving that these are the parts that came from the Q? I don't know. Maybe so. Like, maybe all of that has been proven, like, as much as it can be, and there is consensus. But he's not telling me that. And as a layperson who went to like a 36th rate school, apparently, for
in the state.
State. Like, I don't feel like he's answering my questions. He's just saying, this is true. I'm an expert, so you should believe me.
The weird thing about that with the Q source is I actually wrote down is that one thing that Blomberg says is, well, Q is nothing more than a hypothesis. That's how he started, which is a weird thing to say about Q.
If you've said that, though, then it seems like to say this hypothesis says this and this and this.
Yeah. Because when I read him say Q was nothing more than a hypothesis, I think I wrote down in my notes, oh, Q was a hypothesis, but the authorship of the Gospels is a fact. Really? Are you fucking kidding me? Like, Q.
That's a good point.
Q is as close to a fact that you can't prove as possible. Like, Q definitely fucking exists. Like, if we had a time machine, I would bet my life that Q exists. It absolutely does. And for him to say it's just a hypothesis, because the Q source is not a good look for the divine inspiration of the Bible. It's not, because that's why I like the Matthew question so much, because I thought it kind of about Q, but never about Mark. Mark is actually just as good, because if you're Matthew or Luke and God is telling you what to write, why would you rely on what someone else wrote? That's not necessary when you have God whispering in your ear. And so I was really happy he asked that question about Matthew, and Blomberg's answer blew me away, asking why Matthew would bother copying Mark. Blomberg's. Oh wait, next page. Blomberg smiled. It only makes sense if Mark was indeed basing his account on the recollections of the eyewitness Peter. He said, as you said yourself, Peter was among the inner circle of Jesus and was privy to seeing and hearing things that other disciples didn't. So it would make sense for Matthew, even though he was an eyewitness, to rely on Peter's version of events as translated through Mark. I could not believe this answer. And in the next paragraph, Strobel was like, oh, that does make sense. Peter was closer to Jesus, and so the guy who knew Jesus would obviously ask Peter's buddy and not Peter himself. Like Matthew spent 3 years with Peter, and you're telling me he couldn't get similar stories, or hell, just write stories. He spent 3 years with Jesus, and he still had to rely on secondhand information from Jesus from 2 different sources. And I'm supposed to believe this is actually the Apostle Matthew? Get the fuck out of here. And Strobel just buying that, said, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And amazing. What'd you write? I can't read it. It's too small for me to.
Heart eyes. Do you see the heart eyes?
Oh, eyes. Okay, yeah.
Strobel's response after all the things you just described. Yes, I thought to myself, that does make some sense.
Yeah.
That's why you have heart eyes. He's like, maybe this guy really does love me.
Amazing.
Maybe I can really believe him. And then in this paragraph, which comes right after, he does exactly the thing I was saying before, where he shifts to a story, talking about what an important reporter he was.
Yeah, can you tell the story?
And he's like, I was an eyewitness, but I wasn't like one of the really close up ones in this very high profile story about the mayor of Chicago. I worked at the Chicago Tribune as an investigative journalist at the time. And so that's why I was there. And he's like, after I wrote down what I thought, I went up to this other guy because he was closer up. And I was like, hey, is this stuff that I wrote down actually accurate? Because you were closer than me. I just want to make sure I got all my facts right. That is how careful of an investigator your author is right now. You can definitely trust the narrative I am spinning. And then he played back the tape. His friend played back the tape of what Daly, the guy, had just said. And he could check what he wrote down a few minutes ago while he was listening. He wrote down, and he could now listen to the recording some other guy in the same place at the same time made a few minutes ago and compare what he wrote down to what this tape player said. And he is saying then that is the same thing. That is the same thing as what the apostles or the writers of the Gospels were doing. And to me, that seems like a very false equivocation.
It couldn't be more false.
Different situations. He's like, see, here's an interesting story about how important and great I am at my job. And it proves that this other story is true because they're the same thing. See?
Yeah.
Then quoting a document we don't even know for sure if it exists. It can't even be proven for sure that document exists. That proves that their documents are all true firsthand, and that even though they didn't sign them, they're definitely the ones that wrote them. That's the same thing as me listening to a recording and checking the transcript I just wrote down a few minutes ago.
Well, he was talking about Mark. We know Mark exists, though, with Matthew quoting Mark.
With Matthew quoting Mark?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's the same principle, but I'm
just saying, it's not the same thing.
It's not the same at all. Yeah, it's not
the same thing.
It's
because there were no tape players.
Yeah.
There were no clips of video footage to watch.
Yeah.
And so even if you are interviewing, if you ask me about something I encountered 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, even if I am a firsthand eyewitness, that's not going to be a great source, honestly.
No.
Not nearly the same thing as one person writing down and another person tape recording the same thing at the same time and then literally comparing notes right away, right then. That's not the same thing. And I feel like he's trying to say those are the same thing.
Yeah, he's trying to say that him getting an actual recording of what happened, like a rock solid evidence, and say, okay, I'm going to transcribe that, is the same as someone who knew Jesus going to someone who didn't know Jesus and looking at his writings because he got information from another guy who knew Jesus and saying, yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to go ahead and take this secondhand information and write third-hand information when I have access to first. You know what it would be like? Actually, in the story, what it would actually be like is if he listened to the tape recorder and then said, well, maybe someone else heard something different and talked to someone else who heard it and got his secondhand info and wrote it down. That would be a fair comparison, and it would be a dumb thing to do. It doesn't make any sense when you actually knew the guy yourself, right?
Yeah, it seems kind of like if he had seen what he saw, and then like a couple years later, he tried to write the notes that he wrote that day.
Mm-hmm.
And then he like asked that guy who made the tape recording that like after he wrote down the best he could remember, if he really had been there, like then, which is assuming, you know, that Mark or Matthew or whoever was really there with Jesus firsthand.
Well, Mark wasn't though. So it had to come from Peter. That's the thing. Like he would have to have secondhand info, right?
Well, but I'm just saying, I feel like I know he's saying this with Mark and Matthew here, that to me, it felt like he's kind of trying to, I feel like he's drawing a broader conclusion here. And maybe I'm wrong about that, because he does say exactly what you said, that that's what Matthew did with Mark in the next paragraph. But to me, it feels like he's saying like more broadly that citing other sources, like first he wanted to prove that being an eyewitness, like he went to a lot of effort early in the book to say how very important eyewitness testimony is and how reliable eyewitness testimony is.
Yeah.
How indisputably weighty eyewitness testimony is. So first he did that, and then he wanted to prove, and almost all of the people who are writing these documents were eyewitnesses. That's one way we know this is really weighty evidence, because eyewitness evidence is weighty, and these people were eyewitnesses. And anything they wrote down that wasn't eyewitness is what we have to deal with now. And so I feel like he, with this story, is kind of trying to say, hey, if they asked other people for advice, it's fine. People do that now. See, here's a story about that. And so that kind of was my takeaway from it. It feels like he's saying, just like a reporter today could compare today notes he took with like absolutely clear recorded evidence, like a sound recording of the person speaking, like that is the same as like this person asking this other person about something that happened 50 years ago, or asking this person who knew somebody but he's dead now. Like that's all the same thing as comparing. Like that's what it felt like he was saying to me with this story. Like that, I feel like if I was just reading this casually, that would have been my takeaway. It's like, this is just more another example of how the way in the Gospels were collected and recorded is trustworthy and true and has value. But I don't know, maybe it didn't come across.
That last question though, like with that story that he was talking about, because the question that Strobel asked him, why would Matthew, who was an eyewitness, rely on Mark, who was not? Because they don't argue that Mark and Luke ever met Jesus. Like they don't argue that. So it's like that. Why would a primary source go to a secondary source? And his argument is, well, because Peter was closer to Jesus than Matthew was, which is why the recording and everything. It's like, but that's still stupid. Like it doesn't make any sense. Like I don't know. It's it like you said, it wasn't convincing in any way, because they are completely different different stories he's telling. Because like if you wanted to make that argument about eyewitnesses, okay, but Mark wasn't one, and they don't pretend he was. And so it's like, it's kind of strange, you know? Yeah. And I wrote, actually in my notes, I wrote down Strobel gullible is what I wrote there. Where it's like Strobel Blomberg says simple because Mark got his info secondhand from Peter, who was closer to Jesus, and was like, "What the fuck? Didn't Matthew know Peter?" I don't know. It was one of the dumber parts of that chapter. I got to say, like he had to rely on someone else who knew his friend. And
I did think that the use of an interesting story
Mhm.
function as, like, I feel like his stories create an involuntary emotional response, which to
Mm.
me is one of the measuring sticks for art.
Yeah,
Like, if your art, which I mean, a book is a form of art, if your art does not evoke an involuntary emotional response in the person experiencing the art, you've kind of failed, because
Yeah.
that's what art should do, in my opinion. And it's like he takes the story, you feel the emotional response, and then that is the evidence.
yeah, yeah,
It's like an altar call at church. It's like the music. You've heard all these words, and then you hear this music, and you feel an involuntary emotional response to this art you're taking in, and then that is how you know that God is calling you to go forward to the
yes,
altar, because you feel this emotion. And I feel like we're primed for that. The people who are going to read this book and actually like seriously consume its content, it's like you're primed for that, which is what I'm kind of trying to say about like the broader implication of this. It feels to me like just a piece of evidence more broadly for like the fact that the way the information was collected in the
yeah,
Gospels was trustworthy. It was trustworthy and it was fine. Don't ask
yeah,
me, because
yes,
here's proof, which I think he's really good at that, at crafting. Like, he's very concise.
Mhm.
He doesn't like waste time with any extra information. He cuts right to the chase, and he only includes the information that we need to know to prove his point to be true. And the word, like his vocabulary, like I said, is very it's very colorful. Like, he really paints a picture, and you feel the emotional response at the resolution of the story, and then you're like, oh, I guess he's right. I feel the feeling that I feel when I know something is true. When I've heard a story and I'm like, that's true, it's like you feel it. So
yeah,
that's not really like a fact, but I feel like it is convincing anyway. You see what I mean?
yeah. It's annoying. It's like,
Yeah.
it's,
It is.
I,
It's annoying.
But
you see what I mean, though, that it is convincing. If you already are primed to be convinced by an emotional response, because that's the leading of the Holy Spirit in your heart, and because you believe all of this is true already anyway.
Yeah, it's more of like a religious exercise than an academic one. I think you're right, because I went into reading this book with a deep curiosity about how I could, defend difficult questions that, if you talk to people, and for people with different religions, people from different denominations, atheists or whatever, they're going to have some pretty tough questions for you. And so when I saw this list of kindergarten questions, it offended me. It's like, okay, I'm wasting time reading this when no one's gonna.
Maybe are smarter than Strobel's.
Well, no, it's like
most harder questions.
It was like, these aren't that's the part that was like, these are not questions who anyone seriously challenging your assertion is going to ask you. This is, like you said, this is just to fluff your ego. Say, oh, don't worry, you're right, and they'll give you the softballs.
Like in a Christian movie.
Yes, exactly.
The questions he would ask.
It's just softballs right over the plate that you can knock. Which is what, honestly, that is why I think, rereading this again, that Matthew question's a good fucking question. It's the first good question he asked the entire chapter. Why would a first-hand source bother wasting his goddamn time checking a second-hand source? Because no one would ever do that. Like, please find an example of that happening anywhere, of someone like writing that where they do something like that. And it's like, especially when he does it twice. He does it twice. He does it with Mark and he does it with Q. I was like, I love that question. That's a question that I don't remember reading that, but I know TJ, 21-year-old TJ, would have jumped off. Oh, that's a good question. And then he gives me the answer of, oh, well, because the source was a good guy who knew Jesus. It's offensive to me. It is offensive as an academic exercise. But if you're right, if you're looking at it as someone who's just looking for their faith to be validated, and you preach it in a flowery way, and like you say, you spin a good yarn.
Feeling.
Yes.
That is what is communicated, I think, to a believer as conviction.
Mm-hmm.
Or the working of the Holy Ghost. Like I was saying before, it's like you perceive the emotional response as like, oh, like this resonates with me, which means the Holy Spirit is letting me know this is true. And that's more important to you than the facts.
Yes.
I don't know how many times I heard, oh, this archaeological discovery has like disproven something about Solomon's temple or whatever, or this scientific discovery has like proven the earth is older than 6,000 or 2,000 years. Definitely, for sure. Oh, no. And people would always be like, well, science has been wrong before. Archaeology has been wrong before. And like, see, here's a story of when they found something in archaeology that disproved the Bible. And then later they disproved the archaeological finding. And actually the Bible is true. And that's what's going to happen with evolution someday. That's what's going to happen with those retrograde viruses one day. You can't lean on your own understanding because God is bigger than your brain. And so when you feel this emotional response, that's not an emotional response. That's the Holy Spirit communicating with you, letting you know that this is true. And his understanding is above ours. So that's what we can trust. That's more important than facts. So even though, like you say, he's carefully disproving one claim here, I'm saying I feel like he's trying to like layer these like building a wall out of bricks built from like shaving cream or something. And he's like, here's another one. See how foamy and pretty it is? Just ignore that it's all going to disintegrate as soon in moments of examination. Like the bricks will all be gone. So that's what it feels like to me. And I feel like that's why, like, if I had read this when I was still a believer, I think I would have been like, oh, this is great. Like, he makes such good points. Like, I think I totally would have been, I wish I had been more like you, where you're saying, like, you would have realized the cold, hard truth right away.
I mean, I guess it depends, like, what you're looking for. Because if you go into it looking for reassurance, you're going to find it. Like you said, you're going to find it. Yeah, you will absolutely find it. But if you go into looking for answers, and I love that you brought up when they would, because they would do this all the time, people. They would talk about, usually went in reverse for me that I saw, but that went the other way too. Like the Hittites is what they brought up a lot, where you remember I was talking where they said that the Bible talks about this group of people called the Hittites. They lived in Turkey 3,000 years ago or something like that. But for a long time, there was no archaeological evidence for the Hittites. I don't think they found like the 17 or 1800s, something like that. And so I remember reading several times in Christian history books that, people used to say that the Bible wasn't real because they kept talking about this group called the Hittites and that there was no evidence for them. But eventually, archaeology caught up with the Bible and it proves the Bible was correct. And I was like,
the Bible, that phrase.
They said it all the time. Now, look, props to the Bible. They were right about the Hittites. The Hittites were real. Got it. But what they would do,
I haven't heard somebody talk about Hittites in so long. That's great.
And what they would, and so I remember seeing this article that was being shared around. I was in my college days, and it was about Solomon's temple, where they found like the pillars.
I was saying, yes. The pillars of Solomon's temple.
Yeah, they found the pillars of Solomon's temple, which there was no evidence of this temple prior to this that we could find anywhere. It was written about, but no one actually was like, look, Solomon's temple was real. That's how we know the Bible is true. The Bible's always right. And they do this all the time. Every time there's like just some inkling of the Bible is true, it must mean the entire thing is true. It would be like 10,000 years from now, someone finds a Spider-Man comic and makes a religion out of the Spider-Man comic, but there's no evidence New York City exists. It's like, well, look, it says Spider-Man's from New York City, but we have no evidence place existed. And then some archaeologist 10,000 years from now finds out New York City is real. Boom. That means Spider-Man's real. There's no difference. It's the exact same thing. They will take something that's historically true that the Bible mentions and extrapolate that all the comic book shit is also real. And it bugs the shit out of me. And in reverse, what they did.
Analogy. Wow.
Another one that they'll do. This bothered me so much.
That probably will happen too, or something like
I know.
I wish I could be there to see it.
Another one that they'll do is like kind of the reverse of it, where actually, no, it's actually the same thing. Well, I remember these articles coming out about mitochondrial Eve. Do you remember seeing these things about mitochondrial Eve? And of course, when they came out with
what it means, guys.
Yes, they would say, well, look at that. Just like the Bible said, Eve was real. It's like, okay, this is part of a giant report that's all about evolution. Like 99% of this, in fact, 100% of this entire study is about the human genome going back hundreds of thousands of years and how definitely related to other
Adam and Eve 6,000 years ago.
And none of it points to a single couple from 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, mitochondrial Adam, or there's no mitochondrial, I mean, like, what's it called? Ancestral Adam? I can't remember the Adam's called, but mitochondrial Eve, it exists like 100,000 years from the Adam that we have or something. They were not the same. And it's like, they will take this broad work and find one sliver that agrees with the Bible, and then say,
it sounds like it does.
Yeah, or if you squint, it looks like it. Yeah. And ignore everything else and say, okay, that part is right because it agrees with the Bible. It's like, you can't just pick and choose like that. That's not how this shit works, but they did it all the time. It was incredibly frustrating. I hated that. All right, so we're finally get to, I think I got this part here where, make sure. All right, so he says, hot news from history. It's one thing to say that the Gospels are rooted in direct or indirect eyewitness testimony. It's another to claim that this information was reliably preserved until it was finally written down years later. This, I knew, was a major point of contention, and I wanted to challenge, I'm sure you did, and I wanted to challenge Blomberg with this issue as forthrightly as I could. Again, I picked up Karen Armstrong's popular book, A History of God. Listen to something else she wrote, I said. We know very little about Jesus. The first full-length account of his life was St. Mark's Gospel, which was not written until about the year 70, some 40 years after his death. By that time, historical facts had been overlaid with mythical elements which expressed the meaning Jesus had acquired for his followers. It is the meaning that St. Mark primarily conveys rather than reliable, straightforward portrayal. Tossing the book back into my open briefcase where it belongs.
I love that that's what he does with this book.
Yes.
By former nun. Also a female, and they're easily deceived. Pick up on that Karen is a female name.
Yeah. I turned to Blomberg and continued. Some scholars talk a lot of nonsense. They say the Gospels were written so far after the events.
Mostly the female ones.
And the Greeks were written so far after the events that legend developed and distorted what was finally written down, turning Jesus from merely a wise teacher into the mythical Son of God. Is that a reasonable hypothesis? Or is there good evidence that the Gospels were recorded earlier than that, before legend could totally corrupt what was ultimately recorded? What did you have with that section there, Heather?
Blomberg's eyes knew.
Actually,
how dramatic Strobel is.
Yes.
Of drama.
He does.
Is where I give him my highest.
Yeah, he does. He's the flair for the showmanship. He does.
Yeah, he really does. But like, I just wanted to say something really quick because you
said
for like 2 whole pages of fun things. The Jesus's most audacious claim part.
Okay.
Because I just thought this was great. How at the end of the section he says, as you see, there's all sorts of materials in the synoptics about the deity of Christ. And I just thought you should know it's actually 3 things that he cites.
Okay.
Before saying that, do you want to hear what the 3 things
Yeah.
are? Okay. Number 1, I had to write this with eyeliner because my baby lost my pen. That's why it looks weird like that. So he says, can you find the theme of deity in the synoptics? Yes, I can, he said. It's more implicit.
Oh, boy.
Which means implied, in case you want. Which might be why he used the word implicit instead of implied, because implied would be a more clear word.
Mm-hmm.
But you find it there. Think of the story of Jesus walking on the water in Matthew 14:22 through 33. That is evidence number 1.
All right.
He said, I am. And that is the same I am from the burning bush. That is evidence number 1.
Mm-hmm.
When he talked about why and how he was walking on water. Number 2. So he didn't say I'm God, but he said I am.
Mm-hmm.
The same Hebrew word.
Yeah.
I am from the burning bush. That's how we know. Number 2. I raised my hand to stop him. Hold on. I said.
Halt.
Reaching into my briefcase.
Oh, boy.
Book and leafed through it until I located the quote I was looking for. This is from the book by Karen Armstrong. That's she wrote a whole history of God and she doesn't know a dang thing about him. So Karen said the term Son of Man simply stresses the weakness and mortality of the human condition. And Blomberg is like, that's a load of horse shit. Sorry. Son of Man is quoting Daniel. If you look back at the book of Daniel in one verse, it says the Son of Man probably is indicating the divinity of Christ. That's example 3.
Boom.
Those are the all sorts of material in the synoptics about the deity of Christ.
Spilling over with it.
And that's why when John goes into greater detail in the one non-synoptic gospel,
Yeah.
he is just like going for the Christology aspect. It's it's the logical progression. not because people were adding more supernatural stuff as time went by, but just because of like how it went.
Right, of course, yeah.
It was already, the others were all full of 3 things. The other synoptic gospels,
Yeah.
they're all full of these 3 all sorts of things. And so that's why John is not out of place with the synoptic gospels. It's a clear, like, next step to walk up on the staircase.
It's right there.
Yes. I thought that was kind of funny that he said that. And I also thought it was interesting, right before the hot news from history, the gospel's theological agenda, that he said, in the ancient world, the idea of writing dispassionate, objective history merely to chronicle events with no theological purpose was unheard of.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote history if there wasn't a reason to learn from it. And then I said, I suppose that makes everything suspect.
He did say that, didn't he? I think that was an actual quote. Yeah, I think I wrote that down.
I suppose you could say that makes everything suspect.
Yeah.
That's how skeptical he is.
Yeah.
And Blomgard's like, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, I thought that was actually a weird, because I wrote that down, but I was like, it was, I don't know, because, I've thrown my words here. Because when I ran across that, I had a few thoughts, and by the end of it, I was like, this is. My first thought was, why are we talking about the theology? Almost, I don't care. I remember like, this is odd. That why would you, if you're focusing on like, was Jesus real and everything, the theology seems strange. That's an odd question for a non-believer to ask. That's a really weird question for.
The book's title is not, "Is God Real?"
It's the
It's
case for
faith
Christ.
in
I
Christ.
know, yeah.
And
But
so
supposedly he
it's
doesn't
another
believe in
one of
God
those
yet.
baits and switches where he's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
is God real? Let's take a hard look and see. And then all the questions he's actually asking and trying to prove are, is the Bible true and is Jesus God?
Yeah, it's so
There's
annoying.
nothing to prove if God is real or not. But
Right. And
there's
so
all these pages, and none of it's about proving
that's not yet. We got a few chapters to go, so we'll see. But then
Anyway, back to the hot news from history.
well, what I want to say on the one you mentioned, because then he starts going on about something that's true, because like what he said wasn't incorrect. Well, but he said that the way ancient people wrote about history was not the same way we write history, which is 1,000% accurate. Like there is nothing wrong with that statement at all. And they didn't see the world the same way we saw the world, and that it's weird to think about. Like we had a discussion about this a while ago with science and how the scientific method as we know did not exist. People had trial and error, but they didn't just do the third step of the evaluation and then retry. I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I actually don't know how the scientific method doesn't exist, because I feel like people do it naturally, but we don't, because there was always, like, we have our unknowns and our variables and stuff, but they put like demons as unknowns and variables and shit. And so, but they did this with everything. They did it with philosophy. They did it with history. Like mythology and history kind of blended together a lot of times. It went, like, I think you mentioned it too. The cold hard facts weren't as important as
Yeah, he said that.
as
like I'm saying, I don't know. I'm not a scholar of history or the Bible, not really. And so I don't know if that is true or not. Right? Like not actually. I would suspect, like you're saying, I would suspect it is true. It sounds legit.
Yeah.
But I don't know that. And like I feel like most people who read this book probably don't have the equivalent of a minor from a crappy Bible college from 20 years ago. Like they're probably less than that to go off of.
Well,
you know what I mean? And like, I don't know. That was the thought that kept occurring to me as I was reading these claims he was making. The thought I kept coming back to is, I don't know if this is true. Like the claim he's making, I don't know if it's true. And I would have to put like quite a bit of study into figuring out. Like this is like books worth of information that he's claiming in this one sentence here. And like, I just kept thinking, whether it's true or not, like, I don't know. And I feel like probably the vast majority of people who read this, they wouldn't know. And to find the answer, to know, to verify, is this true or is it not true? You would have to do like a significant amount of research. And to find information like this, like to find information about Q, that's like an accurate and scholarly source and not just like someone's opinion, not just some YouTube video where somebody's talking about it and saying what they think. But like well, facts. Like, I don't even know that I would know where to start finding those references. Like, I feel like that's usually the stuff you figure out when you are actually a Bible scholar. Like, I remember in grad school for music, I would have these open book exams because it didn't matter that it was open book. Good luck. Google about pericopal preaching. And you know what I mean? Like, you're not going to find the answer anywhere online. You have textbooks, and you have to have the textbooks and know where to find the answers. And so I just keep thinking exactly what I was saying before, like whether the claims are true or not is irrelevant for most of his audience. It's the feeling you get when you read the facts and how it sounds convincing. And it sounds like, well, this is somebody who would know better than I would. It's true. He's the scholar, so it must be true. I'll believe what he says.
That's a really good point. That is a really good point, because like I read this book as someone in the middle of Bible college who really cared and really gave a shit about it. 99% of the people that read this in 1998, they didn't have like the Google like we had now. You couldn't just check this shit. Like if you're already primed for it and you've never heard of Q, you're your mind is being blown by new shit every page. Like, wow, this is amazing. And of course, it's easy to get swept up in it because people are inherently curious. We love learning new stuff. And when the new stuff already matches your preconceived, prejudices, you're just going to go right along with it. That is a really good point. That you like even simple stuff. Like you're right. Like simple stuff like the way history was written thousands of years ago. People don't know that. They don't. Like, why would they? Why would they even bother learning that? But what was interesting to me about this is that he's not incorrect. That is generally how it was. But he tries to say two things at the same time, where he says people who wrote history back then weren't so concerned with cold hard facts and like actual reality, but everything written in here is a cold hard fact and it's reality. Like that's a weird. He said it like it was.
That's true.
Yeah, it's a weird that it was like a glaring contradiction
like
in his
witness thing from before.
Say what?
It's just like the witness thing from before.
Yes. Yeah. This is, and it's like, but I can see people missing that if you're already, oh yeah, well of course, yeah, and then just kind of skirting by. But it's like it bugged me, and then this actually I had a hard time writing about it because it's like, well, what am I gotta like? It's internally inconsistent.
Mm-hmm. It's like, wait, what do I say about?
Yeah,
like, I have a feeling about this. Like, how do I articulate?
Yeah,
that I'm experiencing reading this book right now.
Yeah. It's like two conflicting foundations the entire argument is built on. It's hard to. And the last thing I wrote down is that
most of the arguments, I feel like so many of them are that way.
Yes, it's frustrating.
Like, how would you say that as a formula? It's like this, like A isn't true, and that's why A plus B equals C for some reason. But like, if A is true, A plus B still equals C.
Exactly. Yeah, it's true. No matter what. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Which, I mean, I just want to say, I know that's not, this book is not saying, in fact, this book is trying to do the opposite of this. But and I know this isn't necessarily a Christian fundamentalism book because like he specifically talks about how Blomberg stuck it to those fundamentalist preachers when he was helping translate a very conservative translation of the Bible. It's rife with misogyny, etc. But it was more progressive than the King James version, and that was fundamentalist mad. So I guess he's not a fundamentalist, and the book's not supposed to be for fundamentalists, which I think was part of the appeal for fundamentalists. It's like, this is a pretty progressive book.
We're all edgy. Look at us. We're cool.
And he thinks that Jesus was the Son of God and the Bible is true.
Yeah.
Golly, it is. Anyways, like, I just remember being told in fundamentalism growing up, which, as I said, is not what this book is claiming to do, that you don't need to know. Like all the things I'm saying, I don't know. Like, you don't need to know that. You read the Bible, that is all you need. Reading the Bible in English, as long as you're reading the King James translation, that is all you need because the Bible interprets itself.
Yeah.
Anything that's not true is either you misunderstanding something or science or history or archaeology, like not catching up with the real truth that the Bible is saying. And that's why you don't understand it. And if you don't understand it, like that's Satan trying to deceive you.
Yep.
Or like there's always a reason. It's like if your perception of reality and your understanding of logic does not align with what the Bible says, you are wrong.
Right.
Because the Bible is God's word. How do you know it's God's word? Because the Bible claims to be God's word. How do you know Jesus is the Son of God? Because the Bible says Jesus was the Son of God. How do you know he's born of a virgin? Because the Bible says he was born of a virgin. How do you know the Bible's true? Because the Bible says it's true. And it was breathed out by God. And like, if you're using that as the foundation for the belief system, you can't refute the belief system.
Nope.
Possible. Like and so I feel like when that is what you're trying to do, so he's like, that's not what I'm doing. Here's real evidence and the real hard questions. But it's like that crowd who already believes based on circular logic that all of this is true, like that's a pretty softball audience to be, pitching to, I guess, is what I mean.
Yeah.
So he is asking harder hitting questions than those people are hearing in their churches. Probably.
Oh my God. Oh.
So, you see what I mean?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Oh, that's so depressing. That is so depressing. These are harder questions than they're used to ask.
But
Oh
it's
my God.
true, isn't it?
Oh, well, not my church. I gotta feel like
I didn't hear in my school. I did hear some of these.
yeah.
But not all of. Well, who knows? I could have forgotten. Of course, I could have forgotten. But like, I don't think, even if I sat in church 3 times a week growing up, like I did, and I wasn't homeschooled to go to the Christian school,
Yeah.
and I did that all the way from birth till now, I don't think I would have encountered and had a really solid understanding of most of these things that he's saying in this first chapter.
Yeah.
So if you consider that's the audience to which he is coming to, you know what I mean?
And I bet a lot of them don't even go to church at all. Like, a lot of these folks probably never even, they're just like Christians.
Or read the gospel.
Yeah, they grew up Christian and they want to be Christian. They want to, they make them feel good about themselves.
Ephesus. What's Ephesus?
Yeah. They couldn't name like the cities that Paul wrote to or anything like that. Yeah, they didn't know anything about that shit. So yeah, like,
you're like, those were letters that Paul wrote?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Oh God. It's just candy from a baby, man. Like, this actually makes me more upset because like he's just exploiting people's ignorance, and all that. But and then last part with that is what also he said, like the line, when you said that line, it jumped out because I remember noticing it when he said that, well, I guess that makes all history suspect then, right? And the thing is, like, what I wrote down is that, yeah, all history is subjective, it turns out. There's no such thing as dispassionate here. What the fuck are you talking about?
It turns out.
Yeah, it's like that. Honestly, that part just annoyed me so much, and I was already. And then when he said that, well, I guess that makes everything suspect, I was annoyed on 2 fronts because 1, he's making a false equivalency that like obvious myths that are written about like magical beings and shit is just as untrustworthy as, yeah, this king won this battle. No, those are not equally untrustworthy.
Well, that's the point.
Yeah, they're not equally untrustworthy. Yeah, some stuff is obviously not real, there's varying degrees of certitude we can have to the reliability of a statement based on how much it comports with reality, right? So if I tell you King Henry VIII was injured because during a jousting accident, it's like, okay, I know they jousted back then. I know it's a dangerous sport. I know King Henry participated in this. That I'm willing to believe without a whole lot of evidence. I'm like, okay, I can buy that. Or if you told me, yeah, King Henry VIII he could speak to the dead or something. He could raise people from the dead. It's like, I'm gonna need a lot more evidence for that. One seems a lot more like a legend than the other to me, and he's pretending.
Appointed by God to be the monarch.
Exactly. Yeah.
English church.
Yeah, exactly. Like one seems like I don't like that, and so yeah, all history is subjective, but it's not all equally subjective. So. All right.
That's a really good point. But he makes it seem like and this is exactly what I was trying to say about the Matthew Mark question with the daily interview story we were talking about before.
Yeah.
Arguing about it. You would indulge me. Felt kind of like an argument, a little bit. Like I had a different point than you did, sort of. Like this is back to that same thing where I'm like, I don't think, had I read this book in my teens or 20s or childhood, I don't think I would have remembered much of all the specific arguments he was making. I would have left the book remembering the impression of the emotions I felt while I was reading the book.
Yeah.
I felt those emotions in response to cold, hard evidence.
Yeah.
By experts who knew much better than I do and probably better than most people what is true. Yeah. And so like I know, people today compare stories, even if they are firsthand witnesses. So the fact that some people in the Bible did that is probably fine. And I know that this here says that all historical facts are impossible to prove. People in ancient history weren't even trying to put cold hard facts. And so that's fine. we believe that Alexander the Great existed. We believe that, all these other famous kings from history existed because somebody wrote down that they did. And so I can believe that same stuff about the Bible. Like, I would just take away general principles of like, yeah, the Bible is true. Like, I read this, he proved it. I felt in my heart that it was true. I felt the emotional response to the facts he was giving me because the Holy Spirit was telling me it was true. Like, that's what I would have taken away.
Yeah.
More than like, well, this person said this, like the exact facts. I don't think that stuck with me.
Yeah.
Much.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think that's true
for most people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sold 18 million copies and did something.
Really?
18 million. I mean, it's been 20
years.
In
the United States?
Let's see. I'm thinking worldwide, but
it's oof. This has been translated from the original.
Oh no, it's 5 million. Wait, I thought it was 18 million. Where did I see 18? We checked it the other day. 5 million. Yikes. Yeah, still a lot of books.
10 million on the back of the book.
What the fuck? Okay, I thought. Oh, you know what? Hold on.
Okay. Now, the new edition includes scores of revisions and additions. Blah blah blah. The Case for Christ and its ancillary resources, whatever that means, approach 10 million copies in print. Which maybe doesn't mean sold, but they've been printed. That's like another little bit of vague information there.
I don't know. Well,
they've been printed. They might not have been purchased yet.
I think
ancillary resources count as.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Give me 1 second here.
It doesn't matter. Probes with bulldog-like tenacity.
What the fuck?
Biblical Christianity.
Oh my god, it's so absurd.
Who has a PhD had to say.
All right. Wow. All right. So, So closing out here at the very end, they're talking about the mythology angle of it, and basically what Karen Armstrong said is that, Jesus died somewhere around AD 30. Mark was written around AD 70. And by this time, legends had grown about this Jesus guy and that he had risen from the dead. By the way, didn't mention it, but the earliest writings about Jesus come from the Apostle Paul, everybody. And Paul's earliest writings date back to around AD 50. Earlier we were mentioning, my throat. Earlier we were mentioning that there are no verified eyewitness contemporary testimony of Jesus written down anywhere. The closest thing we have to that is the Apostle Paul. And we have several writings by Paul, and Paul was alive around the same time. He definitely would have overlapped. But Paul himself admits he never met the man. Paul's like, nope, never saw him. He's like, I saw him in a vision after he was dead, which I'm sorry, does not count for historical accuracy as a contemporary witness. But Paul's the closest person we have that actually wrote something down that knew Jesus. Sorry again. But the writings, like we mentioned that in John, you get a lot more of the magic shit, a lot more of the miracles and the deification and shit like that. Reading Paul is fascinating because Paul never mentions the virgin birth. Very weird that Paul never mentions the virgin birth. And so it almost seems like by the time Mark was written, the legend had kind of grown to the fact that, oh, by the way, Jesus was born of a virgin. And that's what they're referencing here, that, all this time had passed and that, these are oral traditions and people tell their fish stories and they grow more and more. And you might be surprised to hear this, but old Blomberg didn't take this too well. He thought this was poppycock. So after he tosses Karen Armstrong's garbage book back into the briefcase, Blomberg states,
"Should have thrown it trash can."
I don't want to hear anything else from that bitch about Jesus as far as I'm around. He says, the standard scholarly dating, even in very liberal circles. I gotta pause here. I'm sorry. One thing that I miss hearing a lot whenever I would debate believers about this stuff, about biblical history and stuff, they would always say, well, even most atheist scholars believe that Jesus existed and was a person. It's like, what do you mean? Like, do you have a list of atheist scholars? Is there some database where they write down whether or not they're atheist? It doesn't exist.
I don't know how many times he says stuff like that over and over again through here.
Oh, does he? Oh, man.
Bible scholars say, it's been assumed, like, I don't know how many times. And I'm like, where are you citing these sources? You just say all these things are true, and there's nothing to let me know that it is.
Where to check it?
Like, if I had any real doubts about these things being true, like, you did nothing to prove them.
Yeah. And they'll always appeal to, well, this is believed by even the atheist scholars, like even the liberal atheist scholars.
All the atheist scholars' names.
I know, right? Where is this written down? How do you know that? Where's this database? Yeah,
I'm an atheist scholar.
Nobody does that. No, because you know why? Because it's irrelevant. Like that it is irrelevant. If you are an atheist scholar, if you're a Buddhist scholar, it doesn't matter. Like, the facts are the facts, regardless of what religious beliefs you hold. And so it's like, the liberal scholars even believe it. It just cracks me up when they do that. But it says the standard scholarly dating, even in very liberal circles, is Mark in the 70s, Matthew and Luke in the 80s, John in the 90s. But listen, that's still within the lifetimes of various eyewitnesses of the life of Jesus, including hostile eyewitnesses who would have served as a corrective if false teachings about Jesus were going around. Consequently, these late dates for the Gospels really aren't all that late. In fact, we can make a comparison that's very instructive. The two earliest biographies of Alexander the Great were written by Arrian and Plutarch more than 400 years after Alexander's death in 323 BC. Yet historians consider them to be generally trustworthy. Yes, legendary material about Alexander did develop over time, but it was only in the centuries after those two writers. In other words, the first 500 years kept Alexander's story pretty much intact. Legendary material began to emerge over the next 500 years. So whether the Gospels were written 60 or 30 years after the life of Jesus, the amount of time is negligible by comparison. It's almost a non-issue. Did you have anything on that segment, Heather? I have a lot, so I'll let you go first. But I have a lot on this one.
Like, all that I thought is kind of similar to what I was thinking before, is like, I don't know if any of that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Like, off the top of my head. I don't know for sure. That I'm sure I could find out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like what I kept thinking as I was reading this chapter. I'm like, I wish I had like a month to prepare for this, because then I could like go through and actually see which of these claims are real and which ones aren't. But there's so many, and he doesn't trace the chain of evidence in a compelling way. Like, so I could know from this book alone, like, footnotes to prove these things are true. So I'm like, okay, well, if I'm going off of like just the book itself,
mm-hmm.
because I don't have time, to go research all of these facts, I would have to say, oh, that's a pretty good argument, I guess. I know Alexander the Great was real. I learned about him in school. And I don't know much about him, really, I guess, other than that he was great, and he
was great.
Lands, that his name was Alexander, and I think he had a wife named something with a Z or something like that. Can't remember.
I don't know.
And I don't remember much about him at all. And so, and I keep thinking, and I have, like I said, the credentials I said before, like I have completed a higher level of education than like the majority of people in the country I live in. And that's where I'm at. I'm like, I don't know if this is true or not, but if it is true, which I'm assuming it is, or else you wouldn't, like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a pretty good argument, I guess. Like, I find it hard to believe that like for 500 years, nobody wrote it down, and like all the facts were accurate that whole time. That seems like an insane claim, because I'm like, that's twice as long as my country's been around.
I know, right? Imagine if no one had written
anything down about Alexander the Great's life, because I thought they had written word by that time, and like surely people would have written stuff down. And like, it does make sense that people would have made up stories, but I'm like, why would they not have made up stories for 500 fucking years? Like 500 years ago, we were in like the Renaissance era or era, depending which way you like, or I guess now it's 2021. So yeah, like the Middle Ages, I think, or like the era, somewhere in there.
Protestant Reformation times.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 1500s.
Yeah.
21 minus. Yeah. Sorry. So long time ago. Like, I feel like we have pretty good record, like from people who were alive at the time, like really good documentation about what was happening. But I know that's a lot later than Alexander the Great was alive. Yeah. So like, I'm just thinking through all of those things. Like if I couldn't research it, like if I was alive in the 90s and I didn't have the internet, you know, I'd be like, this is a pretty convincing argument, I guess. Like, it doesn't really make sense that it's true, but he's saying it's true. So I guess it is. Like, that was kind of my takeaway. It's like, yeah, that seems, but it seems weird that nobody would have made up stories until after the 500 years.
Yeah.
And then they did. So that was where I was at with that. I was like, this, I don't know what to make of this without researching it more.
Yeah. So what I wrote when I read this is actually something we mentioned before, that this is where apologists do a weird bait and switch. This is like, it is a go-to move. It's very similar to what they've done before, where they tried to demonstrate that a theological claim is true by pointing to a non-theological historical claim. And so they'll say, look, well, we know Alexander the Great was real. Nobody disputes this, right? But the first biography we have about Alexander comes around AD 100, and Alexander died 400 years before that. So, but no one disputes that Alexander was fake, right? We're all in agreement on that. So Jesus' first biography shows up 10 times quicker. It shows up 40 years after his death, and you guys are wondering if he's actually God. Why? If you're willing to believe Alexander was a king, even though there's no writings until 400 years after his death, why aren't you willing to believe Jesus is God if there's writing? Which is not two very different claims, And because it's talking about, the mythology, right? Like, or we're saying that this is all a myth because it's written 40 years later, but 400 years and you're not, it's like the myths are not the same. Like one guy is God, one guy is a dude who won a lot of battles. But so what you're saying is correct. It does seem strange that Alexander the Great, who was alive in the AD 300s, dies and no one writes anything down about him for 400 years. How do we know? And so here's the thing. It is like a purpose. He's being purposefully deceptive, which is like part of the gig of being an apologist.
The feeling I got
it's
from
purposefully deceptive because it is true. He's not lying. It is true that the only surviving biography of Alexander the Great, the oldest surviving biography we have of Alexander the Great does come from Plutarch around AD 100 or so. However, those are not the only writings about Alexander, right? Like there are a few contemporary sources of Alexander who did write about him that we don't have anymore, that we just don't have them. But people did reference them. Several people from different locations saying, like is quoted in this book by Alexander's general, people who didn't know each other, and they all say the same thing. So that book did exist, and the book does go further back. But as far as like surviving records, there are no surviving biographies of Alexander. However, I wrote down what we have here. Let's see. We do have decrees from Alexander the Great of him arbitrating land disputes. There are references, inscriptions, coins, cities, testimonies written by other people citing the same primary sources from the days of Alexander. And we also have fragments from the Babylonian Chronicles. Babylon is a very old city, as we all know. And the Babylonian Chronicles stretched for 500 years from around from 700 BC to around 200 BC. Alexander lived in the 300s, and there are inscriptions that the Babylonians, not even people who lived in Macedonia, like people who lived hundreds of miles away, saying, "Oh yeah, this Alexander guy, he's kicking a lot of ass." And they write down like they even write down when he died. So that is mountains of evidence for someone who lived like 2,400 years ago, that we have like, not only the inscriptions, references from people who would have known him, but survived. Actually, hold on, I pulled it up here. I got too carried away in my thing. What do we have here? All right, this is the Alexander and Arabian Chronicle from the Babylonians, and the Babylonian Chronicle concerning Alexander Arabia is one of the Mesopotamian chronicles written in ancient Babylonia and Hellenistic period. It deals with the events from the last. It's from the year after this happened, right, of the real year of the Macedonian king Alexander the Great. For a very brief introduction to the literary genre of chronicles. This is anyway. This is like them writing about Alexander the Great the year after he won a battle. We have this, like it exists. So so when he says that, the oldest biography we have doesn't show up for 400 years, that's true. But there's a lot of evidence that were not biographies, and even so, like it doesn't address like the actual point, like is Jesus the Christ, the Son of the living God, which is the whole point of this, right? Like Jesus being real is one argument. Like if you want to make that one, fine. But if you want to say he's God, saying, well, the Gospels popped into existence a couple of decades after death, which as historic ain't as far as antiquity goes, not that far. Not it's really that's pretty close. That's pretty fucking good, honestly. But if you're gonna say he's got, like, if for example, if let's say the biography of Alexander the Great wasn't written in AD 100. Let's say it was written in 322 BC, the day before Alexander died. Let's say it goes all the way back to that. If it said he could fly, or that he could teleport, or that he could, talk to, that's a legend already. It doesn't matter if it was written when he died, before he died, or after he died. Once you start incorporating magic into it, it's going to be slotted as legend. Like the proximity to the death is kind of unnecessary, but they act like since it was so close to his death, well, that's proof that it's real. And I hate that. Apologists love to do this, where they'll talk about, we have very little evidence for a lot of these historical figures. And so, the fact that we don't have for Jesus, just take it on our word that the magic is real,
That is a good point. It's the magical thinking that is, I don't know. I mean, I guess because
they pretend that's not the actual case they're talking about here, because they pretend they're talking about the historicity of Jesus, which is I think it is.
Well, I was going to say, I feel like the claim they're specifically supporting here at the beginning of the section is the Gospels are rooted in direct or eyewitness testimony, and the information was reliably preserved until it was written down years later. That's the claim. Not necessarily that Jesus is God, but it's like we know Jesus is God because of that. But
they're talking about the legend in the mythology is what they're talking about, because on this part right here, I don't know what I should have wrote the page numbers down. I'm sorry.
Oh no, but I'm on it. 38.
It's where he says like the scholarly standard of dating. Where is this? Oh yeah. The page before this, it'll talk about where it's good. But in other words, the 500 years. So he's saying the 500 years of Alexander, there was no legend. 500 years later, the legend grew. So there wasn't enough time for legends to grow in the 40, which is stupid, by the way. It was just really, really stupid. But they were saying that it wasn't legendary shit. Like this, the mythology didn't creep in. There wasn't enough time for mythology to grow in those 40 years.
Yeah, like I didn't know all of the historical facts you just said, which would be really helpful to know going into this. But I don't think most people would know that.
Oh, no chance. No chance. Yeah, no chance.
No one who reads this would know all of that stuff you said to be true. So if you didn't know that, though, I think you could still take away what you just said, which was the false equivalence. And I'm trying to kind of trace that, because he's saying we can believe the veracity of what is written in the Gospels because they were written in close proximity in chronological time to when the events described in the documents occurred. And those events were experienced firsthand by either the author of the documents or firsthand by the person being interviewed by the author of the documents. And so because of that, we can believe everything
Yep.
the documents claim to be true.
Yep.
And one of the ways that we know, one piece of evidence that proves this, is that Alexander the Great definitely existed. Nobody disputes that. And nobody wrote down a biography about him
Yep.
until 500 years after. And Jesus was only 40. And at another point in the book, which maybe is after this chapter, I'm not sure, it says maybe only 2 years.
Oh, yes. I got that part too. Yes.
So if we can believe Alexander the Great is definitely real, when nobody wrote his biography till 500 years. Whoa, that's like so much more. It's like you can like spread my hands that far apart and still fit in the screen. And so it's like, if that is true, then obviously the Bible's true.
Right.
Probably and definitely the Gospels and all
Yep.
of things, which is really all that matters if the Gospels are real, for New Testament believers.
Yeah.
So it's all the Old Testament stuff we have to find ways of explaining away with like dispensationalism or some shit, because we like to eat shrimp at the buffet.
Because we like to eat shrimp. It's true. It's true.
Anyways, Golden Corral has some great fried shrimp, and that is where we eat after church every Sunday. So we will not be taking the whole command about shellfish. Thank you very much. Okay, so, but that would be kind of hard. That's so. I don't want to say the word deceptive because that implies malicious intent, but I mean, to say exactly what you said, the false equivalence of the word biography specifically, but you really are heavily implying like nothing.
What? Why are you hesitating to say deceptive? I think that's the best word for it. I can't think of a better one, honestly. He knows there are records of Alexander the Great. That's why he didn't say records. He said biography. I don't know another word for that, honestly.
I just hope he had a different intent.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, maybe.
I don't know, because surely he didn't sit down and write this book thinking I'm going to try to deceive people into believing in my faith. Like, do you think he did?
Yes. I think that's you don't think so, really? You think he was being sincere when he wrote this book? I don't believe for a second.
Yeah.
I didn't back then.
So.
Really? Huh.
Yeah. Like, because I was when I believed like this.
So you think he was an atheist based on how he's talking here? I don't. There's no way. There's no way this guy's an atheist. And why would he only? Then again, I haven't seen the rest of it. But from what I remember, it's been 20 years. From what I remember, it was all people from one side who said Jesus was real. He didn't go to anyone who refuted it at all. Like there was like I said, like if he was Karen Armstrong, I'll be shocked. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be a bunch of preachers and theologians that agree with one particular type of theology. I mean, I have no choice but to come to the conclusion that he's being dishonest, especially when the questions are not. Every fifth question is a decent one, and then 4 of them are layups. No one who's like going for hard hitting journalism here is going to be asking questions like that and accepting soft ass answers. That's how I saw it. And maybe I'm still seeing through those eyes, but so far it hasn't done much to dissuade me from that opinion that, now, are you talking about Strobel or, the other guy, the scholar guy?
I'm talking about both of them.
Oh, okay. Cause he's
really, yeah, I guess I'm talking about both of them.
Because, like,
the quote we're actually believe what they're saying, like with sincerity.
I do.
They're living their lives based around it.
I wouldn't be surprised if I forgot his name already. His name's a weird name. I can't remember. Blomberg.
maybe.
I wouldn't be surprised if Blomberg does believe, like in Christianity and everything like that. I think he does. From the little I've read about him, I think he does. I still think he's being deceptive, though, because the way he framed it excludes a lot of stuff that would challenge his premise. I think he believes the premise, but he's not interested in going too deep to show how weak it actually is. That Jesus is the Son of God, and we have records 40 years from him. But the closest biography of Alexander, like a guy who's gone to school that much, definitely knows. Like, he studied this more than we have. He absolutely knows that there are records of Alexander the Great that predate his biographies.
What about, like, do you know this? Like, what about like the evidence of Alexander the Great, the coins, etc.?
Mhm.
Are there things like that about Jesus, like from his own
No,
lifetime?
no, there's nothing. It's actually kind of weird. I was surprised when I started studying all this.
Like, there
I
are
thought
things that claim to be, though.
Hmm?
Like that shroud. That
the
they
shroud of you're right.
and like the like there, I think, are engravings of him or sculptures
Yep.
of this, like looking with like the short, curly blonde hair early on and stuff. Like, but maybe that wasn't from during.
Yeah, you can, like, the Shroud of Turin.
You can't prove.
Well, the Shroud of Turin has been like dated back to like the 1200s or 1400s or something.
Yeah.
It is a definite forgery. There are like paintings and stuff, but like of stuff that's actually dated back to the time when Jesus would have been alive. Yeah, nothing. Nothing.
Just
So
claim.
the only thing
we know that it is. But
yeah, the only thing we know are the works of Paul. That is it. That is the only thing we have like written about Jesus, and that's still 20 years after he died. And but yeah, there's nothing. I was kind of surprised to find that out. I thought there would be more. Now, I think that most, if you look at, say what?
I thought there would be more than that.
I did too. I did too. I was
that Josephus thing. I remember hearing that.
Yeah. Josephus. So Josephus wrote about.
He's unreliable anyway, I've heard.
No, so Josephus has like two main quotes that Christians talk about, because Josephus did write about early Christianity, like right after Jesus, like a couple decades or something, kind of like the Gospels. And he wrote that. So you have these people in Judea, and they worship this guy who was crucified by the Romans, and they believe he was the Son of God. And there's another writing where he says something like pretty similar. And don't quote me on it, but basically it says that, and this man was Jesus, the Son of God, or something. And that one is the one that most historians think the first half is true. The second half, because Josephus was a Jew and he would have never said that Jesus is the Son of God. That would have never happened. So the first part is talking about the fact that, in this year, AD 45, there's a bunch of people who worship this guy who was executed by the Romans, and they think he's God. So that's what like an objective scholar who people take seriously wrote about Jesus, but he never met the man. Like he never actually did, and he was never around him at the same time. So that's what they'll talk about Josephus. And Tacitus is a little bit later, but it's pretty much the same thing where they talk about what people believe. But yeah, it's shocking actually that there's no firsthand eyewitness evidence or inscriptions or anything from the time Jesus was alive from anyone talking about him who actually saw him. So it's kind of weird, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of surprising. But most scholars, the scholarly consensus is that that some person, the Jesus story is based on some person, maybe named Jesus, maybe not, maybe an amalgamation. But like the mythical Jesus hypothesis is a minority one. Like most scholars don't believe that. Yeah, so and it's weird with.
There are even like Aslan and I were talking about, I think the other day, like he
the lion. Reza Aslan. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Aslan. The lion.
I
know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The lion.
Yeah. Aslan the lion says that Jesus, the human being, did not exist. It's only about Aslan. the real Lion of Judah.
Nice.
So, but I think most scholars do. Like, they think
Yeah.
he either an amalgamation, like you said, or the person.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that the stuff Josephus said, I feel like that's pretty strong evidence that he existed.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good too. Yeah.
A human being who lived.
Yeah.
Because, like, why would you make that up, and why would people be doing that?
Yeah.
Like, if Jesus hadn't lived, I don't know. But Paul being God, whether Josephus said that or not, like, doesn't, like, I don't feel like that proves that Jesus was God or not. If Josephus was God, like, sorry, like, that doesn't.
Yeah.
I think maybe this is later on in the book, so maybe I shouldn't say this right now. But like, it's kind of like, so if Josephus said he was God and there was like no controversy over whether that was added afterwards or not, would that mean
it doesn't make him God? Yeah. Yeah.
If the biography of Alexander the Great that has the mythological content had been written like during his lifetime, would that mean, kind of like you were saying before, like that wouldn't make it any more believable? And it's like Christians kind of going back to the circular reasoning thing. It's like it said later in the book that, well, nobody is disputing the fact that Jesus performed miracles. Like, at least that much I do know. Yeah, probably not. Lots of people performed miracles at that time. It even, actually, you wouldn't even have to know that. You wouldn't have had to study to know that there were many messiahs and that they were typically crucified and that everybody believed they healed people and they performed miracles like witnesses said they did. It was like, that was a thing that happened at the time, apparently, or at least people believed it was. I mean, people now believe that. People, like, lots of people here in Springfield and James River Church, where I have attended myself before visiting because I have family members who were members there. The preacher grew back a toe. Like,
wow,
like,
amazing.
Or something, was all over. So, like, people now believe in this stuff.
Yep.
Like, that people perform miracles, and it's taken for granted. Like, of course, like this time when God performed this miracle and like healed my cataract, or my aunt's cancer mysteriously disappeared, like, and that miracle was performed. Like, people still believe that now. But it's like, even if you didn't know all that, you could, just knowing the Bible. Pharaoh's magicians performed the same miracles that Aaron was performing.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody ever said, and same like with Dagon, I think, like being knocked over. Like, these miracles happened for and against Jehovah in the Old Testament. Like, you could see it in the Bible itself. Like, miracles were not a thing that needed to be explained away at the time.
No.
In ancient times. Like, it was a foregone conclusion in the culture for all strata of society, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I don't know.
Yeah, why would you question if Jesus performed a miracle when everybody else is? Like, why? You think magic is real? Why would they question that? Yeah.
That proves that the godhood or the miraculous or the supernatural elements are more likely to be true because nobody disputed that Jesus was healing people or performing miracles. Because it just like, they'll be like, oh, well, why do we know that our God is the real God? Because our God is the only one who was crucified and resurrected. No one else has a God who is living proof that their religion is true. And I would be like, oh, how do we know he was resurrected? Because the tomb
was empty.
That's how we know. How do we know the tomb was empty? Because the Bible says so. How do we know the Bible's true? Because the Bible says so.
Listen.
Oh, okay.
Even as a Christian, long before I started my deconstruction, I could not stand when people would bring up the empty tomb. They would ask us like, well, what do you make of the empty tomb then? How about that? Like, that's the best you got? That's it? A story about an empty tomb you can't even point to? Who gives a fuck?
Woman saw an angel there.
It's like,
how do you refute that?
I guarantee
who says he's risen?
I'm positive that the empty tomb is in this book because I remember rolling my eyes with this. I was like, "So you're telling me the tomb is empty, huh? How did that happen?" I was just like, "Wow, come on, this is insulting." I don't know. This is yeah, it's like the problem with this book that I'm going to keep bringing up. Several chapters left, folks. I'm going to keep bringing this up. Is how do you possibly go about historically proving someone is a god? How? Like, what is the bar? Like, what is the line that makes someone a god? Let's say everything written about Jesus is true. Let's say he turned water into wine. Let's say he walked on water. Let's say he raised from the dead. How does any of that prove he's God? How does it? How? I mean, like performing miracles, not something that Jesus alone did. Like Peter did them, Elijah did them. Hell, raising from the dead, 5 or 6 people in the Bible raised from the dead. There's nothing unique about any of this shit.
Yeah,
None of this proves that he's God. It's just like, I don't know. It's like the whole exercise is absurd. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
like the premise of this book is not to prove. What is the stated premise of this book?
That Jesus is God. That's the premise. Like somehow, yeah.
So their premise isn't to prove that God is real.
Well, so he doesn't believe. That's the thing. He doesn't believe God is real. So, like, but his own stated position is that he does not believe God is real. So he needs to be convinced both that God is real and that Jesus is God. And to do this, he goes about trying to prove Jesus is God, which, like, this is why I know he's dishonest.
We don't need to be convinced. We don't need to be convinced God is real. So that's not what the book is doing. The book is just proving that Jesus is God.
But he does, though. Because he doesn't believe, and so like his story.
That was the premise of the book. He's trying to prove that God is real in this book.
The premise of the book isn't that he's trying to prove God is real. No, but the premise of the book, you're right, is to prove Jesus is God. But that's why it doesn't make sense because he needs to be convinced God is real first, and to do this, he tries to see if Jesus is God.
On the journey, I'm an atheist, and here's how I got to be a Bible-believing Christian.
But does that story make sense though?
But he doesn't ever actually take us on that journey.
No, because like
another bait and switch.
Yeah, exactly. It is because he's like, I'm trying to prove premise B. That's what it is. It's like, and just bypassing
a mountain of evidence for premise A.
Yeah. Well,
that's how you know premise B is true.
Well, so I guess I should explain. So my premise is trying to prove that Jesus is God, but I don't believe in God. I should be trying to prove God is real, but I'm going to bypass that and just try to prove Jesus is God. That it makes no sense.
That's what I'm saying.
Nobody would do that. Yeah.
Same thing as the other things, right?
Yeah.
Here are these two arguments, and here's a mountain of evidence for this argument,
mm-hmm.
and that this unrelated argument is true because this argument, like, here's a mountain of evidence that the Bible is true. And the Bible says Jesus is God's son. That's what the Gospels are saying.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
That means, like, God is definitely real.
Yeah. It's like it's not the way human beings think ever.
There's no evidence to prove this part.
Yeah.
To prove that the Bible is true and that Jesus is the Son of God with all of this evidence. That means God is obviously real because Jesus couldn't be God if God wasn't real.
God isn't real, right? You can't have it. Yeah, I know. It's kind of insane. Diamond Dave comment, been a while. Figured I'd drop by and say hi before I move overseas tomorrow. Where are you heading to, Dave? Where are you going?
Oh, is he moving to Germany too? Because of Trump? It's not going to be good people left here.
We don't blame you for leaving, Dave. We can't blame you, man. That's but glad you stopped by.
Podcast of you and me talking one day.
Oh, wow.
We'll be listening.
Mongolia.
Oh, yeah.
That's cool. Wow. Can't say I know of anyone who's gone to Mongolia. That's what for?
That's the one and only place I know of in the world where singers know how to produce with the human voice, the human body, 2 pitches simultaneously.
Is that real? I thought that was bullshit. Is that real?
No, one through the nose, one through the mouth.
Getting married, politics doesn't play a role. Oh, that's cool.
Well, that's good.
Cool. That's cool. Yeah, that's good. That's cool. That's very sweet.
Cool music there. They have these like traditional Tibetan musicians who have like rock bands and stuff. It's very interesting. It's real.
It's real. Yeah. Diamond Dave knows what's up. Mongolian throat singing. How about that? Yeah. I remember. So I watched The Exorcism of Emily Rose. I don't know if you guys saw that movie, but in the movie, it's based on a real story of like a girl who died from an exorcism back in the 70s, and her family went to court for murder or something, and or neglect because like she wasn't eating and shit. But anyway, they played a recording, and she was speaking with two voices, and I was like, oh, that's probably fake shit for the movie. I know that was real. I know you could actually do that. I thought I'd be moving back to India, but then I met my lady, and here we are. Wait, where'd you meet her? Did you meet her in Mongolia or here? There's a lot of missing parts of the story here. What's going on? This is an adventure with Ty and Dave. We're wondering here. Yeah,
that's interesting. I have a student named Dave who's from India, but his name is spelled Dev.
Oh, Dev, like it's pronounced Dave.
Dave, yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. That's some good shit. But all right, well that was good. We have a lot more with Lee Strobel here. I can't wait to see who he interviews next. I cannot wait. He brought up Bart Ehrman. See, not Bart Ehrman, but no, not Bart Ehrman, but what's the guy? William Lane Craig. He brought him up. We met in the gaming Discord too. Oh, wow, how about that? Damn. He brought. I remember reading further. He brought up William Lane Craig. He's a famous apologist. Just like God, is he obnoxious? I wouldn't be surprised if William Lane Craig pops up in here. But that was good stuff.
Would have been a good interview.
Not for Lee Strobel. Lee Strobel, I guarantee, is not going to talk to Bart Ehrman. That's not going to happen. That is not.
All the interviews I really wish were in here are not here.
Yeah. The useful ones, right?
Yeah.
And so, all right, folks, we'll catch you later. Thanks for joining us. Good time. All right.